Morning, ladies and gentlemen. I want to call this study committee to order. I hope y'all are all doing well in anticipation of Christmas next week. If you hadn't bought your Christmas gifts, good luck. I want to just make a few comments as a follow-up from the first meeting we had. Hopefully we're a little bit more organized, but we're still going to be disorganized because of the amount of and the volume of testimony that we're going to take. At the last meeting was a preliminary. We're going to get into more detail. This committee deals with the new business models that are being put forth by transportation referrals and how it affects the other venues of public transportation, taxis and limos, and bring this to everybody's attention just as a refresher. In the state of Georgia, limousines are regulated per se, background checks and such, by the Department of Public Safety, the MCC division. Taxis under Georgia law, taxi services are regulated by local governments. So they're in charge of doing the background checks as well as the other criteria. Then we have a few other things. We've got the airports that control their own property and things like this, and so there'll be an abundance of pertinent information. First, I want to thank the two companies, the two major players in this new transportation referral. We had about a 2-hour or so meeting yesterday to basically discuss some of the concerns. When the legislation was proposed last year, I certainly didn't realize that I was stepping into a hornet's nest because of the popularity. This new yuppie generation lives by the new technology of maybe yuppie's not quite the proper word. I don't know what they call them now, but they live by this new day of technology and things, and it is a new business model. I will say the same comments that I have said from the start of this process last year. I do not have a problem. It is what it is. New technology is bringing new business models out there. But that being said, we have old business models that's been a standby. The taxis, the limo services, and all. One of the things that I have recognized is that if we're going to keep a viable interest, and one of the things we've always done in the state of Georgia is tried to be fair as it came to business interest, to be sure that everybody can compete on the same playing field, and then may the best company win and the best business model win. That being said, there's only been 3 main issues that I have identified to. One is my concern for the public safety. It's always been the policies of the state of Georgia that it's always been our belief that the public has a reasonable right to know that those people that they call to pick them and their families up, that they have been vetted as far as a background check to be sure that they're not a criminal of a particular stripe. That is iffy at this point, but there needs to be uniformity in that process. Secondly is insurance. With this new business model has created new problems. Last session, one of the things we saw was that it was iffy whether they were actually in some of the rideshare models that the insurance coverage was really there, because a lot of them were not driving under commercial insurance. And that's an issue that I had in the discussion with Uber and Lyft yesterday, that they had filled me in on exactly where they were heading in negotiations with the insurance industry. And that's something I think that is a matter of public policy. The public has a right to know that there is insurance, there's proper insurance on them if they're paying to be transported. And then last but not least is the taxation issues. Under Georgia law, sales taxes are due. And I'll let the companies discuss that at some point. That being said, our schedule, and I'm going to ask if, and I want to introduce Abby Day. She is the most important person in this room today. She is the analyst for this committee. She's the one that's going to be sure that I'm out of here and this is done for today at 4 o'clock. I've got to give an address this evening, and I got to be there on time. So she is the most important person in here, that she controls the flow of all information, and she's going to put out a sign-up sheet for anyone that is not signed up today. You'll have today and tomorrow to speak and to address this committee. If the public wants to testify, then we're certainly welcome to do that. Let me introduce my colleagues over here. Representative Dale Rutledge, Representative John Carson, and John is a very important person to this committee because he also sits on the insurance committee, and he's going to be the one that's going to wade through all this quagmire on insurance as we get to that, and Ways and Means on the tax. Representative Donahue will be here tomorrow, and hopefully Representative Riley, soon to be Revenue Commissioner Riley, will be here. Because interesting how she wears one hat today, and she'll be wearing another important hat for come January the 1st. And she will be here tomorrow. The schedule that we've got today is hard. It's hard not knowing how much time individuals are going to be able to speak and address. We're going to start today with the Lyft and the Uber folks to talk about their business models and the such. We have representatives from the insurance industry that are here to talk about insurance issues and of concerns. We have members of the Georgia Bureau of Investigation that are going to be able to talk to the committee and others about the importance and how the GCIC, NCIC background check works. We have a representative from Georgia Motor Coach. We have the Honorable Frank Redondo, the Association Director for the Georgia Chiefs of Police. We have representatives from ACCG and GMA, from local governments, the City of Atlanta, the airport, and the City of Atlanta Taxi Bureau that are here today. Tomorrow will be reserved in the morning for the limo and the taxi industry to address their operations and how they deal, the Sheriff's Association. The Department of Public Safety is scheduled for tomorrow afternoon at 2:30. If this committee winds up quick enough tomorrow, then we may just forego the Department of Public Safety at this point, depending on how far along we get. And there may be a lot of redundancy in a lot of the comments, because I do expect to be a lot of, hopefully I'll hear a lot of good questions that will be asked out here as we try to piece this puzzle together. But that being said, I do want anyone else who is not signed up that wants to be signed up to speak, if you would, get with Abby and sign in. At this time, I'm going to call Uber, representatives from the corporate company Uber, to come up and basically talk to us about their business model. And if you feel more comfortable at the table, Nick, y'all are certainly welcome to use the table or the podium, whichever one. And Abby can tell me which one of the mic buttons to cut on.
She said
the remote, because clearly our technology is up.
Oh, that's fine.
But just right and left, obviously.
Okay.
So, and then make sure you're
Can you hear me, Mr. Chairman? Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity. Good morning to both of you gentlemen. Very much appreciate the chance to be here and to talk to you both a little bit about our business. My name is Nick Zabriskie. I'm the Public Policy Associate for the East Coast from Uber Technologies. I don't know if all of y'all will be able to see it, but we do have a slide presentation over there that I thought might inform this conversation. So if you can see it, you can sort of keep along, but we'll go from this. Figure out this microphone. So by way of introduction and starting, I'll just give a little bit of background about the company and sort of the idea that spurred the creation of our technology and the idea, what we're setting out to do. And basically, it's a simple idea. In a lot of parts of the country, it's very difficult to find transportation options, and so our co-founders, they had the idea that wouldn't it be great if you could take out your phone, press a button, and somebody would come and pick you up. Well, basically, this idea, they set out, they're entrepreneurs, startup culture, all that stuff that you read about in the news. They took that idea and they put it into practice, and they had a bunch of engineers and they started building, and all this stuff that's way over my head. I can't speak to any of this technology business beyond what we all do here. But they took the idea that you know, we could take this technology, we could match it up with folks that are willing to provide rides. They could come and they could pick people up based on GPS. They could take them to where they wanted to go. You could link it all with a credit card and make it a very simple, seamless transaction that would fit the needs of the consumers. So in 2009, the company was started, and it quickly became apparent that there was a ton of demand, not just within the small circle of people who came up with this idea, but across the country. And so today we are in 6 continents. We're in, these numbers are actually a little bit dated, but we're in, I think, well over 46 countries. We're in over 250 cities. Worldwide, number of cities in the United States, and here in Georgia, we're in Atlanta and in a growing number of cities. And the reason for that is because we're providing a service that folks didn't realize they needed, but as soon as they have access to this kind of technology, they realize that it's actually a huge convenience that can help people get around. It can help folks get from the doctor's office to work meetings to a night on the town, to avoid driving, having a DUI if you're going out and socializing with friends. So it's become an immensely popular service that has really taken off. And another reason it's taken off is because of the convenience. And so the convenience factor is a huge thing here. You have your phone. You pull it up, you press a button, you request a ride. That signal goes out to local drivers that are in the area. They accept that ride if they so choose. They come to your location based on GPS. They pick you up. The individual that's requesting a ride, in advance of getting picked up, they know, they have a picture of the driver, they have the driver's name, they have the make, model of the vehicle, and so they have all these, there's this one-to-one connection where you actually know exactly who's coming to get you, and you feel a great sense of security and safety in that, because you're not just jumping into a car with a stranger. They come to your location, you enter the vehicle, you tell them where they want to go, where you want to go. They don't know your destination in advance, because we want to make sure that there's no disincentive for anybody to come and pick you up because they don't want to take you to your final destination. You get in, you take the ride, and at the end of the process, whenever you get out, like I said, is a seamless credit card transaction. There's no cash exchange, but we also have a feature where you rate the experience. And so for the first time ever in this space, you're creating direct accountability where every ride is rated, every passenger is rated equally, because you have a back and forth kind of a system. Now, when we're talking about this system, there's a lot of things that I like to point out. But first and foremost, it's very, very transparent, very easy to use. You pull it up, you can request a fair quote, you know how much it's going to cost you to go to a given location. Everything is laid out for you. We want to make sure that our folks, when they're taking a ride, they feel confident that things are transparent and convenient. We also have a number of features, like you can share your ETA, so folks know if you're in a vehicle and you're headed to a given destination, you want to tell your loved ones when you'll arrive. You can send them a little notice, and it'll show exactly on a map where you are at a given time and how long it'll take you to get to your location, which is an added safety feature and a convenience feature that a lot of people love. And we also make it very easy to split the fare. So if you have a bunch of folks that are going to the same place, you can separate out the fare, do it all electronically. As long as everybody has the app, you can split the costs and make it a very affordable ride. And that's one of the other things that is a big selling point for us, is that we offer very affordable rates. And a lot of times they're much cheaper than the traditional options. And that encourages more people to use these services, especially on nights out when they're drinking or things like that, because it's a huge convenience factor. Now, I'll talk a little bit more about how the business model itself actually works. What we do, and some of you may be familiar with how we operate here in Atlanta, we have a black car business here that is all limousine partners, traditional limousine folks that operate black car services, and that's a slightly more expensive product offering that we have. But on the real, truly innovative part of what we're here to talk about today is what we're calling UberX. What our competitors, they have a similar service. It's commonly called ride sharing, but really what it is, it's It's a new idea, and sometimes people talk about it in terms of the sharing economy, but really what it is we're allowing folks that have their own personal vehicle who can satisfy a number of safety requirements, pass background checks, demonstrate that they have adequate personal auto insurance, that they have a driver's license, their vehicles, meet state standards, all those things. We allow them to come onto our platform if they can satisfy all those things and start offering services, start offering rides. And so really what it is, it's a way to take a depreciating asset that might otherwise be sitting in somebody's driveway, turn it into a way they can earn a little supplemental income by offering services that, as it turns out, tons and tons of people actually are demanding, because there's a huge latent demand in the marketplace, I think, for rides that previously has been unrealized, because it's difficult for people to find rides. You have to go to a taxi stand, for example, or request a ride, and somebody will come. You make a call and somebody will come to your location, but you're not sure when they're going to show up. So there's a lot of risk inherent, and it's difficult for the drivers themselves of cabs because they're worried about people flaking. What we have here is we have a system that uses technology to create a match between people that reduces the opportunity cost for the drivers and makes it simpler for the riders themselves, and thereby we see an explosion in all the marketplaces we go to of new people coming out, taking rides, who otherwise wouldn't have been using taxis and limos. I think it's important to talk really quickly about the people that are providing the transportation. We make sure, like I mentioned, that they all go through rigorous background checks. They have to have personal insurance, and then the real feature that adds an incredible amount of safety that I think is often underrated is this accountability, this rating system that I mentioned, where we're collecting data after each and every trip, and we have an ongoing and growing amount of information that we can look at that shows whether the people that are riding in the vehicle felt comfortable with the driver, and vice versa, of course, because it's a two-way street. But we have this record that grows and grows, that we can very quickly pinpoint if there's a problem, or if somebody is they're not providing the best level of service, people don't feel comfortable with the way that they're driving, or et cetera, et cetera. So that's a huge and underrated piece of the pie here, I think, that this technology actually provides a huge benefit for public safety. This is just a slide a little bit more about the background checks. We use a third party that goes out and amasses data from a number of sources. You can look at this list, but basically we do we take records from multiple states. At the federal level, we check the federal databases, and then multiple counties as well. And we cross-reference with the National Sex Offender Registry. And I put this slide up here because I think that it demonstrates there's a lot of ways where background checks, that involve fingerprinting and stuff like that, they're recognized as the standard, but there are also a number of additional traces that you can do that can really add value and help draw a broader picture of somebody's criminal background and help us identify patterns. This is a brief slide about our insurance coverage, and I actually, Mr. Chairman, if you'll allow it and if it's necessary, we have our insurance policy manager, Brad Nail, here today, who can speak a little bit more about this. But the basic overview, as I mentioned, before allowing anyone on the system, they have to have proof of personal insurance. But what's unique about this technology is that for the first time ever, we know exactly when commercial activity is taking place. So if somebody is out in their car, they're logged into their app, they're driving around, they're in their own natural environment, they're used to they know the location, they know where they are, nobody's getting in or out of the vehicle. But as soon as they get a request, they deviate from that normal pattern and they start driving off to wherever the fare is. They pick up that person, they take them to their location, they're getting compensated for it. So as soon as that request signal is accepted to the moment that somebody gets out of the vehicle, that's what we define as commercial activity, and we offer a $1 million commercial insurance policy that's primary from that whole point on, because that's very important, and as you know, public safety is inherent to our brand. If people don't feel safe in our vehicles, they're not going to take our services, and we're not going to be successful. What we do provide in addition to that, though, as you know, there are a lot of different insurance policies out there. Private companies have a right to set their own insurance, terms and people sign into those agreements and abide by them. There are some policies whereby they might exclude the period where somebody is logged into the app and driving, but the vast majority of the policies out there, that's not the case. But for those policies where that is the case, we provide insurance, again, that will make sure to provide coverage in those situations, and we provide it at $50,000, $100,000, and $25,000 because, again, public safety is our #1 priority. And so if there are further questions on that, we're, of course, happy to answer. And then I just threw this added slide in. This is a map that represents what we see as a growing trend. It's very hard to see, and I apologize, but over the past year and a half across the country, we've seen a number of legislatures and local cities take up and pass legislation that really codifies and recognizes that this is a new kind of business model. And these places all represent localities that have implemented a transportation network service, transportation network company style model, which we found to be very practical and a good way to regulate this. But as you'll notice, Mr. Chairman, in the southeast there's a lack of regulations on the books. So we're very eager to work with you through this process as you craft appropriate and responsible regulations that help this business grow and help satisfy the public safety concerns that you're very rightly aware of and trying to identify. So we look forward to working with you, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Nick. We do have a question. Representative Carson.
Thank you. I appreciate you coming out here and sharing this with us. If I could, from a logistical standpoint, can we get copies of these slides, because it's kind of difficult to read it from this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Abby has copies of those that we can share.
We could, fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
The second was, you mentioned commercial liability coverage.
Mm-hmm.
Could you explain that a little bit more to me? Is that who's the beneficiary of that? I presume that policy is secured by Uber, correct?
Yeah, and I mean, Brad, do you want to come up? I mean, he is the expert. If you'll allow Brad to speak on these things, so I don't muddle it up.
Brad, what's your last name?
Nail, like a hammer and a nail. Could you repeat the question for me?
So I wouldn't say I'm concerned. I want more clarity in regard to the commercial liability coverage that was just explained. I want to understand how, if you have a commercial liability or maybe an umbrella that most companies secure, that's one thing. I'm not completely confident yet. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying it doesn't. I'm just not completely confident yet that covers motor vehicle, particularly for-hire motor vehicle transportation. Mm-hmm. I want to know exactly how it does that, particularly within the state of Georgia. And then, secondly, who is the beneficiary? So let's say someone is in an accident on one of our highways, and what have you, and they have to go to the hospital. The Uber driver, maybe the Uber driver or not, but I think to the chairman's point about public safety, we're concerned about the passenger. So how does that insurance cover it? Who's the beneficiary, and how does that work exactly? Let's say there's an accident. How is that policy go into effect?
As to the first question, how it's structured, it's a standard ISO form policy. It's a commercial auto policy. It's endorsed with a symbol 10, which allows us to specify the activity that's covered, the commercial activity that's covered. And the driver, the Uber driver, while they are on a trip, is an additional named insured on the policy. So the driver, really the policy is there for the benefit of the driver, for the liability that the driver will incur while operating the vehicle. And I think that goes to answering the second part of your question, which is that it's $1 million in third-party liability. It's a single limit policy that will pay out for any liability that the driver incurs while operating commercially using our platform.
Okay, well, let me, Mr. Chairman, I don't mean to go off on this, because I know the House insurance committee is also dealing with this. But let's say this was not something due to the liability of the driver. Let's say that I use my app, a driver comes to pick me up, and we start driving, but we get hit by some other driver. Well, that technically, I don't know about legalities, but that wasn't due to the Uber driver and his negligence or what have you. It was due to someone else. And then the passenger that signed up for Uber, the passenger in the back of the car, they incur medical expense of some sort. So I hear what you're saying about commercial policy, but it would not be due to the liability of the driver necessarily, would it?
Right. In that instance, it would be like any other occupant of a vehicle on the roads of Georgia. They would have their right of action against the tortfeasor, against the person who was at fault for the accident. That's the same here. So if it's the third party, the other driver that's at fault for the accident, the passenger in our vehicle has that right of action against that person, just like they would in any other accident.
Except if you have an issue of uninsured, but I understand.
And we actually carry uninsured and underinsured coverage as well to add that extra layer of protection for our passengers.
As part of that commercial policy?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And, sir, you also mentioned a tiering policy of 25, 50, 100,000. What was that exactly?
During that time period when they haven't yet accepted a ride, there's been no request for a ride, they haven't accepted a ride, so they're not really doing anything that would be considered commercial activity. But they have turned their app on. They've activated the app on their phone.
Okay.
There are some personal auto policies that have broad livery exclusions that may encompass that time period. We think the way that I've read them, a lot of the policies are narrower and they wouldn't decline coverage during that time period just for activating an application on your phone. But in case there are policies out there that do exclude that time period, we maintain the contingent coverage that will step in. So what we're trying to do is ensure that there's no coverage gap at all. There's no period of time in which the car will not be covered by insurance, and that's how we set up that structure to accomplish that.
Okay. Before I go further with more questions, I probably
Please do.
spoke. Well, before I do, Mr. Chairman, I probably will speak with the House Insurance Chairman and just clarify that that's his understanding, that he's addressing those issues before I keep going.
Feel free to discuss anything you wish, but ask any question because I find this quite fascinating.
You find insurance fascinating? That's great.
I do, especially after I had to check what was on my shoe last session.
In regard to insurance, I don't have any further questions this time. Just, Abby, if we can get that presentation, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. If I might ask a question, now is this system in effect today? Is
Yes,
this
sir, it is.
insurance
Yes, sir.
coverage that y'all are working, or that Uber, that your company, is that in effect right now?
Yes, sir. The slide that Nick showed you is our current insurance
I
system.
mean, it is activated
Yes.
and is working. Y'all have a contract with insurance carriers right
And
now.
we do. We pay claims they pay claims every day. The system seems to be working.
And how long has this system been in effect?
It has, well, we've had an insurance program in effect since we've been operating. It's evolved a little bit over time. The one that we're telling you about right now, I think I could go back to about December of about a year ago that we put in place the specifics of what we're telling you about right now.
Very good. Representative Rutledge.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Has anyone from the state reviewed this policy? Do we have a copy of the policy and the limits and?
I don't know the answer to that, but we have been open about sharing the policy publicly. We actually have the California version of our policy is actually published on our blog. Anyone
Right.
can go read it if they want to, and we we do have endorsements that would apply to Georgia to make sure it conforms for you guys. And we'd be happy to share that with anybody that wants to take a look at it.
And if I'm riding with an Uber driver, would they have access to that policy to provide that information to me as a rider?
They do.
I mean,
On
like
the-
a certificate of insurance?
On the application itself, the driver has access to, if the state requires an insurance card, we have access to that, but we also put the full insurance cert, the Accord form on there,
Right.
so they can see all the details of the coverage.
How many rides do you, in the United States a day, how many rides are?
So This is one of the areas where it's difficult for us to share this information.
You are collecting the money, aren't you?
We are yeah, absolutely, sir. But for reasons that deal with competition, where we have our competitor here, we tend to be very tight-lipped about that information. We treat it as proprietary and confidential. But I can tell you that we are doing millions of rides. In certain localities, we're doing millions of rides a month.
Can you share how many accidents are happening a day?
I don't actually have that information, but we can. I don't know that we can. I mean, we are paying claims.
I'm sure we can aggregate some material for you if that's something you're interested in.
I'd be interested in that, as well as the policy. Yeah, if you could just get the policy to Abby, that'd be great.
And if I could just, we're in the process of renewing right now this week, so if you want next week, I can probably get you the current policy, not the one that's expiring this week.
Is it materially different?
It's going to be structured a little bit different. The coverage doesn't change at all, but it's going to be structured a little bit differently, and it'll be a little easier to read.
And when is the effective dates of this?
I believe it's Saturday. This coming Saturday.
The 20th?
21st or 20th, yeah.
If we could go ahead and get both.
Sure.
Because I think we're going to start our analysis and so forth. So I don't want to wait until, a few days before Christmas.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any questions, guys?
I'm good for now.
If I might ask just a couple of questions, and I'm letting the experts of the committee hash it out with the insurance.
Me too.
I thought it was interesting none of this information was brought forth to the Public Safety Committee last year when we were discussing this. That's the reason I had asked if this was in effect today.
Sure.
And then, of course, the insurance industry, they'll chime in when they testify in a little while. Let me ask you just a couple of questions on another issue or two. Under Georgia law, everyone's in this particular business, taxis, limos, and public delivery service are required to pay sales taxes. Under a court decision rendered several years ago, referral companies are basically the ones who are supposed to remit if it's not being remitted by the individual contract drivers and such. Can you tell me, y'all been in business 2 years, 3 years in Georgia, doing business here for 2 or 3 years? Can you tell me, does your drivers, do they submit the sales tax?
I know that to this point, I can say that I know all drivers submit income tax. We give everybody a 1099. To your point about the sales tax, I know we've been in talks with Department of Revenue, but as I understand, this is a complicated issue across all the more traditional livery services and this here, and we think that there's probably a lot of revenue lost to the state every year on this issue, and we'd love to be part of some kind of proactive solution to figure out how to best improve that across the board.
Good answer. I think you were an attorney at an earlier life. So are you telling me that, to the best of your knowledge, none of the drivers have been remitting proper sales tax, nor the company, at this point?
I can't speak to what the drivers are doing themselves specifically. I know we give them a 1099 and that they're independent contractors. But I appreciate the concern for this issue, and I think it's something that we can try to work with you.
Could you tell me a little bit about the advantage about being the chair and the sponsor of a bill is I've been inundated for the last 11 months with way more information than I ever particularly wanted to read, but people send me things all the time. One of the attachments that the committee's got is someone sent me a citizen faxed me a copy of their insurance notice from a particular insurance company, and it stated on there to their client was to be unaware that their policy would not cover them if and they specifically cited if you're doing transportation referral service. One of the other things that I get is from some of the folks, and just some of y'all's clients, of the two companies, and I don't think it was, and Liv can answer this when they come up, but there's a series of charges that y'all charge on this, and one of them is a safety charge. Can you address that? What is that safety charge that y'all tag each bill for, and where does that go?
Right, absolutely. Yeah, to my understanding, that charge is part of the fee that's associated with making sure that we're providing background checks to ensure that every driver is you know, a responsible citizen without a criminal record, and specifically without DUIs on their criminal record. And so obviously there are costs associated with that, but you know, it's important that we provide
Just
services.
to break down the fees, then that goes into the companies that covers the.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Let's talk about the background check a little bit more. And we had this discussion yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very grateful. And if I understand, when we were talking about yesterday, the companies that y'all are concerned about your drivers, that y'all use a third-party tester.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that struck me yesterday was that while that's all fine and well, unless there is a fingerprint given that verifies it is who it is, and it goes through the criminal, a verifiable criminal background check that keeps a chain of evidence, basically. Your third party investigators, I believe you told me they go to courthouses and things such as that. But if they don't have a GCIC, basically fingerprint GCIC background check, how do we know for sure? Because if they go to one county, you know, and we live in such a mobile society,
Mm-hmm.
that someone could have a citation in a different county or another criminal record in some other county.
Mm-hmm.
And under the rules of what we've tried to do in the past, or in present and past in Georgia, was to look at not just the criminal background,
Mm-hmm.
but to look at a pattern of conduct. If it's a pattern of unsafe driving,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll get into just briefly, but it's like DUIs. If a lot of people that have the resources, they'll hire a DUI attorney. And a lot of times that DUI is sometimes pled out to
Mm-hmm.
something else. But still it's a DUI. It's an unsafe practice. Do you not feel that there could be a little bit stronger way of verification of the backgrounds?
Well, absolutely. I think that this is one of the areas where we're constantly trying to improve our processes, and I think it's worth noting that there are a number of different states with different procedures, you know, for trying to capture this. It's certainly not a you know, one state does this perfectly, and you know, I think we're trying to figure out the best model right across the board, and this is an issue that every state struggles with, and some are better at capturing certain data about people's criminal behavior, and some, you know, some are maybe better suited to capturing DUIs, et cetera, et cetera. From our perspective, though, Mr. Chairman, we operate in all these different states, and we need the most uniform system possible to ensure that we're capturing everything, and that no, you know, as you're seeing, no DUIs are slipping through the cracks. We want to have the strongest possible system in place. And it's not enough for us simply to rely on you know, on the fingerprint databases in a lot of cases, because that's dependent on criminal records associated with a fingerprint being uploaded into the system. And as we know, unfortunately, not all offenses are appropriately printed. So from our perspective as a company, this is our number one priority. It's what we tend to spend a lot of our resources on, because safety is crucial to our brand. We have to go above and beyond, and from our perspective, there are a lot of gaps in fingerprinting that don't satisfy the concerns of our customers or us as people that are matching folks with drivers that are behind the wheel. And so I do think it's an open-ended question, and I think that there should be, in any legislation that's contemplated, I think, you know, as we try to address your concerns and make sure that the public is protected, we should leave flexibility to make sure that we can constantly improve the practices and constantly reach higher and higher levels of driver safety as technology improves and we can source more information from different places. So that's our concern. We don't want to rely just on a background check that's associated with a fingerprint, because we worry that there are things that might slip through the cracks. But we're happy to work with you on that to figure out the best way to address these things.
I appreciate that. We had a good discussion yesterday, and you know, of course, I'm pretty stubborn to the fact that, you know, there is no perfect there's nothing perfect when it comes to doing criminal background checks, but still, when you speak about things falling through the cracks, still the mainstay is identification of the individual through a fingerprint, and then doing that criminal background check that may be missed by a third-party investigator going from courthouse to courthouse or city hall to city hall. And I thank you. Questions?
I don't think you're stubborn, Mr. Chairman. I don't think you're stubborn. No.
Thank you for your vote of confidence.
I appreciate that. In regard to the sales tax, are you remitting sales tax at a Uber company level? Are you remitting that to any states in the U.S.?
There are very few states that actually have sales tax. So on transportation.
Okay.
So and again, we facilitate the transaction. I didn't actually properly explain this before, but we facilitate the transactions. But it's a good analogy to think about our business. We're kind of like an Orbitz. We allow a bunch of people that meet a certain standard to provide transportation services.
I appreciate that. I
Sorry.
appreciate it. What I want is a clear answer. Are you filing and remitting sales tax in any states in the United States
I don't have
for transportation services?
I don't believe that I don't have that information. In the couple of states that I'm aware of where this is an issue, I know we've been in talks with their departments of revenue trying to figure out a good solution to this. A lot of the time we fall outside of the traditional bounds of what's regulated and was contemplated by law. So as we work to come under those regulations, establish appropriate ways of regulating this industry, we're trying to work out those issues too. But it's only a handful of states that have sales tax on transportation.
Could you get those to us? I mean, we could also research it from the Tax Foundation, but I'm more interested in regard to how that law does or does not exempt Uber, and whether or not you're filing those sales tax returns at an Uber company level to that state, or are you just delegating it to the drivers?
I think,
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll get that in.
So my second question is, I'm not asking for proprietary information in regard to your margins and that kind of thing, but let's just say I want to follow the cash, okay? And this is a question directed at sales tax. So let's say an Uber passenger is picked up, and they pay Uber $50 to go from here to the airport. I know it's not that much, so let's just use that. $50 from here to the airport. You pay your driver, you don't pay them $50, obviously. You pay them $30 or something like that.
Sure.
So my concern is it would only make sense that if sales tax was to be applied to all transportation services, then it should be applied on the gross amount and not collected by an independent contractor who only gets paid a fraction of what Uber collects. So my issue is, let's say the sales tax rate in, I think, the city of Atlanta, Mr. Chairman, is 8%. So if I pay $50 on Uber to go from here to the airport, but the driver himself collects $30, would he be? Are you presuming that they are filing those sales and use tax returns, which I doubt many of them are, personally, that they would be remitting 8% on 50 out of the 30 that they received? Do you follow that?
Yeah, I do follow that. It's a good question. And I'm not sure. To be totally honest, I'm not sure how it works because, like I said, we don't deal with this in a ton of states because it's not a tax that's on a lot of these services. But I can just quick points of clarification. The way it works, these are independent contractors. We don't pay them, but they get a fare, and then we take a 20% fee of each fare. For the licensing and for providing the market, and et cetera, et cetera.
So your margin's 20% on every gross revenue. 20%. So in that example, the driver will get $40. Okay.
Yeah, but it's like I said, this is a tricky issue, and we want to work with you folks to get it right.
Is that 20% margin for Uber before or after the safe delivery of $1 fee?
I think it comes before.
Okay. Okay. Just, I am serious. I would like some follow-up in regard to the states that, to your best of your knowledge, based on your compliance, that require sales and use tax be paid based on transportation services. And second, which, if any, states Uber is filing. Is that make sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
I'm happy to get that.
We probably need that in the next. It shouldn't be too complicated if we can get it by the end of the week.
anyone that's got a request, that we make a request, if y'all could be prompt about maybe reporting back, because we're going to get a report ready before January the 1st, and possible suggestions.
Absolutely.
Representative Rutledge.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This app is great. I mean, I would think it would be not too complicated to put a sales tax platform on this app and solve that problem. But I'm not a coding expert, but I would think if you develop this nice app, that would be pretty simple and not a big obstacle to handle.
Right.
But you had a list of states that already have, regulations out there. What, in your opinion, what state's doing it right?
Well, there are a number of states. Obviously, it's a new industry, but there are 3 states so far that have passed this legislation or similar models of legislation. They're California, Colorado, and Illinois. We like the Illinois model in particular. We think that's a pretty appropriate response. There's also Washington, D.C. has passed legislation. Now, I'm not sure to what extent the state of Georgia wants to look to Washington, D.C. for inspiration here, but it is a very appropriate free market kind of approach to this new model that we think has a lot of fairness for both the traditional industries and ours.
Right. Well, I absolutely love the service. I think it's great, but obviously there's some concerns that we've got to, work together to get it,
Absolutely.
good resolution.
Yeah.
Very good. And I thank you. And I agree with you. And Georgia is pretty much a free market state. But I do have concerns when we have some of the business models that by Georgia law that have to do certain things, and then others that don't. And that creates an unequal playing field.
Sure. And if I might, to that point, I mean, we support, competition in the marketplace, and to the extent that, maybe regulations that are dated and kind of put burdens on other industries can be lifted, we are all in favor of that.
Very good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Joe, you're up.
I think so. Good morning, Chairman Powell and members of the committee. My name is Joseph Okpaku, and I am the Director of Public Policy for Lyft. I appreciate this opportunity to be here and answer any questions that you might have. And I also appreciate being given a few moments to give a brief overview about Lyft's origins and how Lyft works. The 2 co-founders of Lyft, John Zimmer and Logan Green, have kind of an interesting background. John Zimmer came from a hospitality background. He went through a hotel hospitality program at undergrad, and he was struck by the fact that that the key issue for hospitality tends to be the vacancy rate. How many seats or beds are you able to fill up in a hotel? Logan Green, on the other hand, had a transportation background, and he had traveled to different countries and had seen how in other countries sharing rides was just a way of life, that it was just kind of a common way to get around. Okay. I'm not quite sure why my presentation is showing numbers in extremely unreadable font. But what that is supposed to tell you is that when John and Logan came together, they came across a statistic that shows that 80% of seats in cars go unused every single day. That's a very fancy way of saying that when you and I drive around, our tendency is to drive alone. And if you think about it in the context of vacancy rates in any other industry, an 80% vacancy rate would absolutely torpedo that industry, whether it's airline, whether it is hotel, theater, restaurant, what have you. So they identified this as the greatest inefficiency in ground transportation. And given our inability to really further build out our infrastructure, and in fact, we really see that our infrastructure is in many places failing, the greatest inefficiency where we can improve the nature of ground transportation is finding a way to fill up these 80% of seats. And that's the fundamental underpinning of the idea of Lyft. So essentially, Lyft is trying to replace the prior attempts to make carpooling more mainstream. As you probably know, there have been multiple attempts to do so. Some have had some minor success. I'm maybe familiar with the slugging program in DC where people can pull over and pick up people. There's no oversight. There's no requirements in terms of insurance or what have you, except for what the driver is supposed to have on his or her own. There may also be Craigslist programs where you can just go on Craigslist and see if someone is going to the same place that you're going. But on a mainstream scale, the idea of trying to mainstream ride sharing has, for the most part, failed. So when Lyft launched in 2012, we only launched in San Francisco. We launched in June of 2012, and at the end of the year, we were only in San Francisco. What we found out was that the need for a service like this was so great that as of a couple of months ago, we have now expanded to 62 different markets all across the nation. The way Lyft works is very similar to the way the Uber app works. If you're a driver, you sign up, you undergo the background checks that my counterpart at Uber described, a federal criminal background check, a national criminal background check, a driving record check, a sexual offender check, and then also the county-by-county search that I believe Nick did a very good job of describing. Assuming that that person passes all of those checks and their vehicle passes the inspection and they had proper insurance, they're allowed to provide rides on the Lyft platform. And as a passenger, what you would do is download the app, request the ride. You're going to get a picture of the person who's going to pick you up. You're going to get a picture of their vehicle, and you're going to get a picture of their license plate or a readout of their license plate, so you know exactly who's coming to get you. And I want to stop there for a moment because I really do want to hit on the fact that this, we believe, is adding a layer of safety that has been previously unseen in basic vehicle for hire or ground transportation. The idea of the anonymous ride is really gone under the Lyft or the TNC platform because each ride is GPS tracked. We know which passenger is getting with driver. And significantly, the drivers and the passengers all know that their rides are being tracked and recorded. So it really provides a great incentive to provide a very good ride experience on both ends of the transaction. So after the ride is over, you submit the payment. It's all cashless. You sign up with your credit card. And then significantly, you have and Nick did address this, you have a chance to rate the driver, and the driver has a chance to rate the passenger. I'm going to focus on the driver rating for a second. On our system, there is a 5-star rating system. So if you give 5 stars, great. That means you had a great ride. There's nothing to worry about. However, if you give 4 stars, as you will see in the third from the left panel, it will prompt the panel on the last where it says rate. And basically, by giving anything less than 5 stars, it's asking the passenger what could have been better with this ride. It gives 4 categories: navigation, friendliness, cleanliness of the vehicle, or safety. If safety is touched, or if anyone enters a free-form comment that has one of literally hundreds of safety-related keywords, that automatically triggers an alert to our trust and safety team. And this is really important because given the fact that the only way that drivers can provide rides is through the Lyft platform, we have the ability to respond to safety issues and shut down a driver's access while we investigate something literally by pushing a button. So if there's a safety concern that we think needs to be investigated, we can, at headquarters, press a button. That driver is no longer allowed to accept rides on the platform while we investigate. Here's what I described on the driver end. You submit an application through the app. I described the background check that you must provide. And then on the driver end, as you are having passengers, after the ride is over, you also have the ability to rate the passenger to ensure that the passenger is also acting in a proper manner as well. And we can also respond to issues that may occur with passengers. They don't happen very often. If they do happen, this is anecdotal, but usually there's maybe been a couple of drinks involved. But I point that out because as Nick mentioned, we do think that TNCs do serve as a great way of reducing instances of driving under the influence, and that's why you've actually seen a lot of articles and a lot of partnerships with organizations like Mothers Against Drunk Driving supporting apps like this and legislation that allows companies like Lyft and UberX to thrive and survive because it does provide greater transportation options when they're most needed. Now, you may recall, and this is a while ago, about a year ago, that when I was here, I was talking about Lyft after Lyft had been in existence for about a year and a half. And I told you that we were writing what we thought was chapter 1 of what was a very long story. I'm not sure if you recall that, but I talked about the fact that we were looking to build up more critical mass and how important critical mass was to the success of a company like Lyft, because we are relying on people who are looking to do this in their spare time. 70% of our drivers drive 15 hours or less a week, and more than 50% of our drivers have some sort of full-time or part-time employment. So the reason that this is critical is because the only way that Lyft can work and a ride-sharing platform can work is if you have enough people participating, not necessarily full-time, but enough people participating 10 hours a week, 20 hours a week, because the reality is that if you request a ride the first time and don't get one, maybe you'll try to request a ride a second time. Chances are you will not try to request a ride a third time. And that's why critical mass, from our point of view, is one of the critical mass of drivers participating on a part-time basis is one of the most important keys to the success of a ride-sharing platform like Lyft. And to that point, you may recall me saying that last year, to that point, it's only through that critical mass that Lyft has been able to recently offer a couple of new products in our most mature markets in California. The first one is Lyft Line. You'll see the graphic here that says that every day, 90% of Lyfts have someone else taking the same trip within 5 minutes. That allowed us to launch a product where, and I'm sorry, I don't know what is going on with the graphic, allowed us to launch a product called Lyft Line, which is where two separate people who are going to the same destination can share the same Lyft on their way. So let's say I'm going from here to Buckhead, and let's say you, Chairman Powell, are a few blocks away, and you also want to go to Buckhead. The same Lyft driver can pick us both up. We share the fare, pay about half the fare, and get to the same destination. So it's getting congestion off the road, it's providing a cheaper form of transportation, and it's really getting closer to that true carpooling vision that Lyft launched with back in 2012. And just recently, we'll see if I have a slide that works on this. We just also launched Lyft Driver Destination, again in California only. The reason that it's only in California is because those are our oldest markets, and that's where we have the greatest saturation of drivers. Lyft Destination is what you might call the next step towards a more pure form of ride sharing, meaning that if I'm going to work and I just want to see if I can find someone to give a ride to on my way to work, I can enter my destination and see if there's a passenger who is going to that same exact destination and give that person a ride on my way to work. That just launched literally a couple of weeks ago in California. So these are what I would call chapters 2 and chapters 3 in the evolution of Lyft, as Lyft continues to try to improve and offer more products that can help reduce congestion, provide significantly less expensive transportation alternatives, and fill in transportation gaps where they may exist in cities like Atlanta or across the country. So that's the end of my presentation. I was going to spend a little bit more time on insurance, but I do think that Brad and Nick covered the insurance issues pretty well. Our insurance policy works almost exactly in the same manner that the policy I was described to you previously, but I'm still happy to answer any questions about that or anything else that you might have.
Thank you, Joe. As I understand, you basically agree that y'all's business model on the insurance, liability insurance, is the same as what Uber is using?
Yes.
Good. Can you tell us, is your answer with y'all's company, are y'all in the same posture that Uber when it comes to the sales taxes, and y'all pay your employees with a 1099 and such as that?
Yes, we do give our employees 1099s. I believe that Georgia is the only state that we're in that has sales tax on transportation. So this really has been a unique issue for us. I will double check to make sure that's correct, but I believe this is the only market. So we were, I will admit, a little bit surprised when that issue arose because it had been something that we had not encountered before.
Very good. Mr. Carson.
Can you, forgive me for missing part of the presentation. Are you primarily, like you said, on the East Coast, or where are your markets primarily? I know you said there's about 60 cities.
We're all over the country.
You're all over the country.
Several in California. We're in Pittsburgh, Texas, Massachusetts, D.C., Florida, North Carolina, Maryland, Virginia. Okay,
second
Illinois.
question. You have a similar insurance coverage policy, similar in structure to Uber, from what from what you heard?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Could you share a copy of that with us?
Sure. I will say that we do take pains to make sure, we believe that our insurance policy is a trade secret. We were, even though it's an ISO policy, there are aspects of it that were developed between us and our insurance provider, so we do take great pains to make sure that it's not just distributed willy-nilly to the public, but we will find a way to make sure that you have a chance to review it.
Maybe through a secure data room or something like that?
Exactly.
Okay. I'm happy with that. And
I'd be glad to set that up.
for legislative and official purposes, it would be kept confidential, but we just, yeah.
We appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. I had another question, but maybe we'll come back later.
All right. Representative?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're talking about the insurance. One thing I thought of is, what if an Uber or Lyft driver, slams the door on my finger accidentally and takes my finger off?
My understanding is that that would be covered by the insurance policy, that anything that's related to the ride would be covered. I don't know that that's actually happened, so I can't speak to a specific incident, but my understanding is that would be covered by the policy up to, again, up to $1 million.
How many rides do y'all give in a day?
I honestly don't know. And as with Uber, we are fairly tight-lipped about some of our data, but I do know that we've recently mentioned that we've given over 10 million rides in our existence. But I honestly don't know how that breaks down to a per-day total. I've never actually seen that data.
If I might ask Joe, ask you, and ask Nick over with the Uber folks, both companies originated out of California. Is that correct?
Yes.
That's quite telling. But as I'm gathering, most of y'all's operations are centered by the more heavier metropolitan areas.
Most, not all. We do have some smaller markets, and in some of our larger markets, as we build up the pool of drivers, we're able to expand more and more into the outlying areas.
So I guess my question is, representing the rural areas of Nick, you too, but representing more rural areas, so do y'all, in God's sakes, beat me with a stick? I'm not trying to get into y'all's corporate plans, but is this something that y'all anticipate moving on in nationwide into the more rural areas? I heard I think I'd been very plain spoken that coming from rural areas, we don't have taxi cabs.
Right.
We can get a limo, but they send it out of a different town or a more metro area to get to where we are. And, quite frankly, I thought last year I had said that it was a great business model because we don't have taxis in small town Georgia. And, if you're drinking, you want somebody to, because of the Georgia laws and because of the people's increased responsibility, if you're drinking and you're going somewhere, you want a way of going. Of course, if you get drunk, you want somebody to put you to bed. But so do you foresee that y'all will be trying to move this direction if those governments, it seems to be such a thorn in y'all's particular sides, if we can come up with a unified system of, quote, answering a few questions?
So I can't say that what the immediate plans are. I will say that the nature of our platform is such that it makes sense that eventually in the long term, and again, I truly believe that we're at the very beginning of the story that Lyft is trying to tell, that a future chapter is one that envisions ride sharing in more rural areas, because why wouldn't it? There are people who are looking to, who may have gaps in income and need the economic opportunity. There are people with safe cars who are willing to provide their neighbors around or drive their neighbors around. And again, like you said, the issues of drunk driving exist in rural areas just as they do in metropolitan areas. That being said, I am not the one who makes those decisions, so I don't want to be misperceived as making that representation on behalf of the company, but I don't see why that wouldn't be something that is in at least a long-term plan.
Uber charges $1, I think, per fare for safety background. Do y'all do the same?
We do.
So y'all have the same type of fee structures and such.
Yes.
In your presentation, it struck me that not only is there feedback on the driver in the car and the transportation, but the driver also does feedback on the passenger themselves. Is this a way of keeping notes that if this particular passenger that's hooked up through this app process, if it's not a desirable client, that y'all don't go back and pick them up again?
So I mean, as I mentioned before, just knowing that there's going to be feedback, actually, we believe helps promote more accountability both on the passenger and the driver, and promotes, frankly, a better ride for both people, especially since you're talking about drivers who are using their own personal vehicles and they're opening them up to someone that they don't know. But I'm sorry, the specifics of your question were if it's used for...
Is that also a way of screening the passengers so that your drivers may not go back, if you put a black mark on their app rating, that they don't go back and pick that client up if it's not a desirable client?
So there is a component where if the rating is significantly low enough that we will take efforts to make sure, and this goes both ways, we'll make sure that that driver and that passenger are not paired again. But in terms of making sure that a passenger is never paired again, we understand that someone may get a bad rating here or there. That's not going to ban them from the system. If there's something that's a pattern of consistent behavior, of being belligerent or what have you, then that may be something that requires them being taken off the system.
Depending on whether they're a happy drunk or a mean drunk.
So to speak.
Nick, would your company be basically the same way of scrutinizing clients?
I wouldn't characterize it as scrutinizing clients, Mr. Chairman, but I would say that, folks, as Joe mentioned, folks are getting into somebody's private vehicle, and so we need to have a way to have feedback if, for some reason, they're destructive of personal property or in some way dangerous. So I think we use it, if we get feedback that somebody was a really bad passenger, we're going to obviously investigate that because we want to make sure that it's a safe ride for everybody involved, all parties involved. But we have very strong anti-discriminatory policies in place, and it's our policies to provide rides to anyone wherever they are. And if I might add too, we're now in Georgia, we're in Athens, and hoping to branch out into other smaller markets across the state. So to your question about serving more rural markets, the goal is ultimately to make it so that anybody could be driving around and have the app and turn that into a way to earn some extra income while also helping out their neighbors. So that's kind of the ultimate end goal. Of course, we're not there yet, and I don't get to make the business decisions like Bill, but just once clear.
Good deal. Any questions from the committee? Mr. Carson.
The same question about sales tax. You mentioned that Georgia is one of the few, if not the only state that you operate in through contractors in which taxes are due on transportation services. Is that correct?
That's my understanding, yes.
Is Lyft is Lyft registered with the Department of Revenue here in Georgia?
I am honestly not certain if we are. I can find that out very quickly for you, but I would echo well, I don't want to anticipate your next question, but I will find that out.
So you can find that out, and so I would presume there's a high likelihood that the sales use tax is not being remitted, at least not by Lyft corporate. Is that correct?
It's possible. I think there's a general question, given the fact that most of these regulations and the legislation that requires tax on transportation, I think there's actually still a question as to whether it applies to a model such as this. At the very least, there can be no question that a model such as a ride-sharing platform was never considered when these regulations were put into place. That being said, I would echo Nick's comments that we are absolutely open to working with you, working with the chairman to try to either devise the most sensible way to go forward. And I will mention that in every other jurisdiction that we've enacted legislation, there has been a framework that we've happily embraced that requires us to either pay a very large flat fee every year or a percentage of receipts, a per ride fee, what have you. It's not our intent to try to duck responsibility. This one, it just happened to be a little bit different than anything we had encountered. So we're engaging in those conversations.
The chairman's take on this, I believe, if I might speak for him, the angle he's approaching this is public safety. That's equally as much of a concern for me. My angle that I'm taking at it is more on the insurance and sales tax side.
Understood.
Now, the insurance is mostly being dealt with by Richard Smith's House Insurance Committee, to my knowledge. So that leaves sales tax. And I don't, whether we tax taxis and limos, whether we don't tax them, I'm not looking for a punitive tax toward Uber and Lyft or not. So I just want an even playing field. It is evil, isn't it? All taxes. I just want an even playing field over all participants. So we're not picking winners. We're not picking Uber over Lyft, over Checker Cab, or over Carry Limousine. Okay.
Sure.
That's all.
Good deal. I had another question. It just sort of like it just went out of my mind. This says an awful lot, doesn't it? But I guess that your opinion would probably be, Joe, the same as what Uber's was, that y'all would have no problems with parity of the laws across all the different the tiers of the system. That background checks, which y'all use third-party testers also, not fingerprints and GSI official verified government backgrounds on criminal backgrounds, but y'all would probably have no problems with parity as far as whether it be limos or taxis, that everybody's playing on the same playing field when it comes to certain things like background checks, taxation, insurance, and things like that.
Absolutely, and to that point, in many of the places where we've seen new regulations or new legislation take place, kind of concurrent with that, you've seen other efforts to update or revise the regulations for existing industries, and we've never opposed a single one of them. We actually strongly feel that rather than, it makes more sense to do that than to try to cram this new model into an existing framework that's not really well suited for it. If you'll excuse the cliche, it's trying to put the square peg into a round hole. So yes, we are always supportive of efforts. We feel that we are part of the transportation fabric. We're one of the many options, and that whatever steps are necessary to update existing regulations and laws for existing industries, we would never stand in the way of that.
Very good. Last question for both companies, and this is just for something for later use, that when we're interviewing with I take testimony from the tiers. Do y'all have a minimum or a maximum rate charge? I know that some of the information we get is some people jumping out of their skins when they take a ride and then all of a sudden they get a bill. I know that you said that, or Uber, I believe, said that their folks, if you use that app, you know how much that ride's going to cost you in advance. But we hear other folks that say, well, I guess, and I don't know the term that, where you can bump the fees. Today it costs more at a certain time than it does others. It's all like the HOV lanes. Mm-hmm. It costs more. Do y'all have a minimum or a maximum that y'all charge as a company policy?
We don't have a minimum, and we'll call it broadly dynamic pricing. I think with Lyft and Uber it differs slightly, so I'm speaking only to Lyft as this is concerned. On the one end, it's called prime time. This is a time period where, because of high demand, we are trying to incentivize getting more drivers out on the road to respond to the demand. And at those times, we will sometimes increase the rates. The majority of those increased rates goes to the driver, so it really is an incentive tool. And at all times, the rate adjustment is not only clearly displayed, but actually you must specifically what's called do a click-through on the app, meaning that click here if you accept the new rate, and if you do not, the ride is canceled with no penalty. So there's no time where that's going to happen where it's not going to be clearly evident to the passenger. On the flip side, Lyft also has we have what we call a fully dynamic pricing model. So we also have something that's called happy hour, which is in times of low demand, we'll actually lower our prices to try to increase demand for the drivers who are taking time out of their day to make their vehicles available and to try to get them more rides. So our model is fully dynamic, both on the high end and on the low end.
But the customer does know what it's going, that if there's a special event or something.
Absolutely, it is.
Where they think that fee may be $20 and they get a bill for $120. Like
it is.
Reports.
It could not be more evident, and I would be glad to provide you with like screenshots of what it looks like to show you where exactly how clearly evident is presented to the passenger.
Nick?
So, Mr. Chairman, it's very similar to what Joe just described. We do the same kind of dynamic pricing model, which is very common throughout the economy. You know, if you go to a Bulldogs football game, you want to get a hotel, it's going to be a lot more expensive that weekend, or prices for flights, et cetera, they go up and down. As Joe was kind of mentioning, you know, both of our companies, the drivers are independent contractors. We can't tell them to be out on the road, so we incentivize them to go out on the road. And so we find that it's actually a very important tool to make sure that we can offer reliable service. So from our perspective, it's much better if you open your app and you really need a ride and you see you can get one, but you know it's going to cost you a lot, versus being stranded somewhere. And I will just add that we don't have a maximum, but during states of emergency, you know, natural disasters, et cetera, we cap our surge. We call it surge pricing. We'll cap that. And we have a partnership with the Red Cross where we donate the proceeds that we get during that period. You know, if there's a natural disaster like Hurricane Sandy, for example, up in New York City, we created a new framework up there, because the intent is not at all price gouging. It's really, like Joe indicated, it's to make sure that the drivers are incentivized to go out on the road and to serve people, because, you know, a lot of the time it's on weekend nights, you know, there's an opportunity cost if you're a driver. You'd rather be at home with your family or out on your own, and so to make the service reliable, we let the price increase.
Very good.
And if I can add to that point, that's exactly the time period where it's, I think, the most critical in terms of safety, weekends, holidays, to really incentivize having drivers out on the road to make sure that there are safe rides and to reduce instances of driving under the influence.
Very good. Any questions? Any further questions? Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
And thank you, Nick. And we're going to move on. Would our friends in the far right corner from the insurance industry, have y'all picked the token spokesman person up here? Come on up.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, real quickly.
Yes, sir.
I'm Bruce Bowers, and I represent Uber. We had asked, and I'm certainly not trying to get ahead of anybody in insurance, we had asked some of our Uber drivers, partners, to come talk. If there's a better time to ask them to come back, I mean, if you'll just let us know when. We didn't know what the calendar was going to be when we spoke yesterday, so if you'll let me know when a better time to ask these ladies and gentlemen to come back. There's only about 4 or 5 of them, and I can just ask them to come back at that time. So.
Is there any way, would it be an inconvenience if y'all could either see if we get caught on into the afternoon or either in the morning? Or would y'all let me ask you, are we talking about prolonged discussion? I mean,
2 minutes, 3 minutes max.
come on up.
Sorry, Stacey.
Hello, my name is Rakeem Jones. I drive with Uber. I've been driving for over a year, and you know, a little bit of my background. I came from New York. I was a project manager up there. I was sick of the hustle and bustle, so I came down to Georgia to be an entrepreneur. My wife and I started a photography business, and times got a little tough, so I had to work for Uber or, you know, have additional income. So this is what I did. My unemployment ran out. You know, bills had to be paid, and my wife said, "Why don't you drive for Uber, you know, for right now?" So I said, "Okay." So I started part-time, and as the time went on, I just noticed I could make more and more income as I set my goals higher and higher, and, you know, that's what I did. And now I'm full-time. I started full-time in the summer because I have to pay tuition for my kids. I have a mortgage to pay. I have a lot of bills to pay, and, you know, we haven't gotten on our feet with our own business. So driving for Uber has been a detriment to my family and me supporting them. So
Detriment?
Detriment? That's not the right word. Okay. But a huge benefit, yes. So, you know, that's my point of view of what I wanted to say, you know, how Uber has benefited my family and I.
Very good. If I might ask, have you, do you feel like anyone that's driving for the public, do you feel that they should at least ways pass vetting as far as a background check, that they're not a convicted criminal or has have a good driving record and such? Do you feel that everyone that drives a public delivery service should have
Yes.
that?
Personally, I know a lot of Uber drivers, and I know people that are trying to be Uber drivers, but they cannot because of their background, DUI, insurance lapse, things of that nature. So I think Uber is on top of, screening these people. The fact of the matter is, when it comes to like public safety, I can even tell my wife to come go drive for Uber. That's how comfortable I feel with her interacting with people and not feeling like, something's going to go wrong or you're going to get in the car with a bad person. When I first started, I actually felt a little bit more nervous about people getting into my car, vice versa, Yeah, I mean, I can go on and on about, stories I've been with, heard from other riders about, their experiences with cabs versus Uber. But overall, this is a good thing. This is a thing that people need. If you're unemployed or underemployed, driving for Uber can definitely supplement your income, which it did for me and my family. So,
Very good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and committee members. My name is Edith Woody. I am originally an original Atlantean, born right here in the city of Atlanta, educated in Atlanta public school system. I am a retired Delta Airlines employee, and I too am an Uber driver. I've been driving for Uber now for about 4 or 5 months, and I can honestly say it has been a great and enjoyable experience. And I would just like to share one of my stories from one of my riders. I picked up a gentleman, and he's originally from New York, so he's used to public transportation and public service. I picked him up. He said to me he had 2 stops to make. Our first stop was UPS. We had to drop off wound vac. He was a recent amputee. I took his wheelchair out of my trunk. He didn't think it would fit, but it did. I took his walker, rather, out of my trunk. We went into UPS. I turned my car off, went in and assisted him at UPS with his wound vac. The next stop was to Publix supermarket. I let him out at the curb. He took his walker and a little bag to go into Publix to buy groceries. And my thought was, how much groceries can he get pushing a walker and carrying a small green Publix bag? So again, I turned my car off. I went in. I assisted him. I took a shopping cart in. I assisted him with his grocery shopping, put him back in my car, drove him back to his senior citizen facility, helped him into his facility, and he was so gracious. And he said to me, who would do this for me other than a Uber driver? And he wrote the nicest email on my behalf to Uber. And it has just been a great pleasure. I'm retired. As Rakeem has said, it has afforded me extra income, and we do it at our leisure and on our own time. And I appreciate Uber, and I appreciate the service that we have provided here in the city of Atlanta.
Thank you, ma'am. I've always said that the people in the South are the most gracious in the world.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. My name is Keith Miller. I want to talk about my experience of coming with Uber. I moved here 9 years ago from the Washington, D.C. area, so I come from an area where public transportation is very accessible. I currently live in the suburbs of Atlanta, Lawrenceville, Georgia. And what I find very interesting, when I first started driving Uber, I was actually doing a lot of drives in the city, coming down to the city, and it always, I did it because, as Rakeem said, I lost my job after 8 years, and it provides little income for my family. I'm in the process. I own 2 companies, and both of them are restaurant-related companies, restaurant marketing. I find it interesting now that I want to go to restaurant owners and talk to them. They are very happy that Uber's around because now they're seeing that more people are coming out, dining out, that people that normally didn't do it before. I also find that when I pick people up, it's always really good to hear people say, well, because of Uber, I'm able to get out more. I never was able to get out before because I was concerned about transportation, not being able to get back and forth. I find now that even when I living in the suburbs, I can turn my app on in my house in Lawrenceville, and I will get a ping from someone that's wanting a ride. And when I pick that person up, they would tell me, you know, when I first moved here, I came here because Gwinnett Transit was here. They've cut some of the routes, and now because of Uber, I can get back and forth without any problem. So for me, it's one thing to say I'm doing it because of the income opportunities, but the fact that I'm doing something that's satisfying the public and giving them an opportunity to do some of the things that they've not able to do before, and that is get around, it makes me feel good. It always makes me feel good when someone says, thank God for Uber, because you know what? I don't have a car. One story I want to share with you, I picked up a young lady a couple of weeks ago who moved here from, I think it was from Philadelphia, and she works down in Buckhead, but she lives in Lawrenceville. And she told me that she was so grateful for Uber, and she also used Lyft as well, but she said that she's grateful for the ride-sharing platform because Gwinnett County Transit had cut their routes. And because she's a single mother, she had no other means of getting back and forth. And because of Uber, she's able to catch the Uber ride from her residence to Discover Mills to catch the Gwinnett Transit that she still rides. She doesn't take Uber all the way down. She just rides it from her house to the transit. But if that wasn't available to her, she didn't know what she would do. So when you hear those stories and you think about what we're doing out there, it makes you feel good that we're providing a service that people need. All right.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Morning, gentlemen. My name is Eric Fernald. I'm a resident of Smyrna, Georgia. I started with Uber about 14 months ago. About 5 years ago, I used to have a pizzeria here in Atlanta. The Department of Transportation had other plans and kind of mowed me down. I didn't give up on life or anything like that. I kind of started to pick myself up again, and I thought that Uber would be a great, initially part-time income to supplant my new job. Been driving for approximately 14 months. I've quadrupled my income in 14 months, and I've gone full-time, was able to purchase an SUV so I can kind of move up in class and make more income for my family. I can drop my boys off every day at school in the morning and pick them up every single night. Some of the things that I've encountered were that we impact people's lives in a positive way, in a meaningful way. I've developed relationships with customers. Some of these people are not of means. It's not always about people with plenty of money going to the airport on an expense account. I've got a gentleman named Chris I pick up in Dunwoody about once a week. He 33 years old. He had a stroke. And over 6-7 months, I've watched him grow as a person again, from being someone who was physically weak by taking him to get his medication some days, taking him to rehab other days. He said that Uber was an invaluable tool for him for getting better. Now, he's been able to rely on public transit occasionally, but he says sometimes it can be cumbersome and it doesn't fit with the schedule of his life. And he doesn't want to be dependent on other people. He wants to be an independent human being. And we help people do that. I've got a little old lady that I pick up in Buckhead, and I take her to a hair appointment once a week. She's 80 years old. Her husband can't drive anymore. These people still live a meaningful life, and we can help them do that without being a burden on their families. They're little things sometimes. These aren't things that make the news every day. And a lot of times we hear a lot of negative stories. But there's a lot of good, real, just honest relationship building that we have between one another. And that I think the experience between myself and the customers is invaluable and creates a tremendous service within society. And that's all I have to say. If you have any questions, I'm free to ask.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and committee members. My name's Ellen Wynn. I'm a lifetime resident of Atlanta, if you can't tell when I open my mouth. I quick funny here. When I connect with a customer through the Uber app, it dials from a Wisconsin phone number, and riders get in the car with me and they say, "You don't sound like you're from Wisconsin." But I'm not. I have been driving for Uber since May. And I've carried over 1,000 riders at this point. And I can tell you, every single experience has been good. I feel like our service has been a tremendous value. Every day that I get out and drive, I know in my heart that I'm providing a positive, I'm making a positive impact on the community, because we're helping those folks that may not have access to general transportation otherwise. Maybe they're in an outlying area, or they're in an area where it would take them an hour to get traditional transportation to their door to take them. Some of the stories I hear from riders, especially if they're going out entertaining, going out to dinner, they now take Uber instead of taking their car and worrying about whether they are going to stop at one cocktail and be able to drive safely home or not. So I know our streets are much safer because of Uber. Our service and our ability to put people to work has definitely had to cut back on the number of people that are unemployed and the underemployed folks. I have 3 personal friends right now that are underemployed. One of them is a sheriff's officer, and she's coming on board with Uber. She's gone through over a week of the background processing and getting her driver's record checked. She's coming on board as an Uber driver to supplement her income so that she can pay her house note and take care of her 2 children that she's a single mother of. I have a couple other friends that are driving now, and it's made a huge difference on their life. So we were talking about the tax issue earlier. I can tell you from a personal standpoint that Uber has had to positively impact the tax base in the state of Georgia on an income tax basis because of those people that are earning income, maybe getting off of unemployment because now they have an opportunity to make money for themselves and being able to pay back into the tax base on the income structure there. The restaurants, I'm sure that some of them have seen their tickets go up because people are more free to come out and spend money and drink and stay a little bit longer and dine a little bit longer than they would have in the first place. So therefore, I believe it's got to be impacting the sales tax revenue there. Again, it's my pleasure to talk to you guys today. Uber is awesome, and I could go on and on about the benefits of this. Everybody that gets in the car with me says, "You're so excited about this." I genuinely believe in it. I see the impact that we make on people's lives each and every day. So thanks for listening today.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, it sounds like any loss in sales taxes are supplemented by liquor sales.
Thank God. All right. Be fine. See if that mic is on. Number 2.
It is.
Go.
So, Mr. Chairman, I'm Bobby Potter. I represent the American Insurance Association of State Farm. This is Stacy Freeman, who represents PCI. Those are 2 trade associations. We've been before this committee before, and you'd asked us to be back, and here we are.
All right, Bobby, y'all have heard since the last meeting, and you know, y'all were not caught off wares to speak today, but you've heard what both Uber and Lyft had said about their business model as relating to liability insurance. Can y'all make a comment on verifying what they're saying? Is this acceptable practices under the national model? Is this a doable? Are they supposed to be filing with the insurance commissioner? Bottom line is our only concern is that the laws of Georgia as it relates to proper liability insurance and for the protection of its citizens are being adhered to. Can you comment to that?
We both can. We probably have some personal observations and maybe some different views. But
sure. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as Representative Carson has mentioned, we're working with House Insurance Chairman Smith on some legislation. We'll be happy to tell you where that is and what's going on. There's been meetings amongst the interested parties, insurers, the insurance department, the TNCs, transportation network companies, as well as lenders, credit unions, and the banks. So those conversations are moving forward, and we think we've got all the issues on the table. How we solve them may be a different issue, but I'd like to say first that PCI is not opposed to the TNCs. The only matter that we are concerned with insurance coverage issues. And as we've discussed before, there's a distinct difference between confirming somebody has insurance coverage and confirming that it's coverage for a certain activity. And so our primary concerns are clarifying who covers what, when. And that's a public safety concern. One, from an injured party aspect, who's going to pay, when, and without delay. And then second, you want to make sure that the private passenger auto industry and its consumers are not subsidizing commercial activities or costs being shifted onto them inappropriately. Because I don't think as we sit here, folks think that private passenger automobile coverage is underwritten and rated for certain types of commercial activities. So, and I think obviously it's clearly commercial. Where along the continuum is it commercial? Some folks have some differing opinions, but we're attempting to work that out.
So, and let me chime in, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, on behalf of both those groups, American Insurance Association and State Farm, and others within the insurance industry. Nobody always speaks exactly for the insurance industry, but from the collective that have been working on this, I'd make a couple of observations. One, certainly that the insurance industry does not oppose ride sharing. Personally, it's a brilliant concept. But it is at the cutting edge, as one speaker had said. They think they're at chapter 1 or maybe chapter 2 right now. All this conversation occurred less than 5 years ago. So this concept is occurring and it's spreading fairly much by wildfire. In the midst of that, there's this interaction between the insurance world and real life when an accident occurs, and then who is responsible for that, when, at what point, after what investigation, and that's what Stacy has referenced. So it's not necessarily catch up, but it's a new industry that did not exist 5 years ago when the Uber slide talked about the ride sharing industry. That wasn't even a concept 5 years ago. It is now spreading, and this idea of what insurance covers what is, in a sense, is catching up. It's not that the insurance world is resistant to this, to ride sharing in any way. It's just who covers it. In some of the presentations this morning, there was the indication that Uber or Lyft ensures that the driver has insurance, or I think one of the phrases was has personal insurance. As Stacey referenced, there may be an insurance policy, but there may be an exclusion in there such that there's a policy but there's not coverage. And that's the catch. And that's the concern is there a circumstance where there's commercial activity and no coverage. Last year, during some of these discussions, there was the term of art used called drop-down coverage that, frankly, none of the folks, including the insurance agents on the committee, had heard that term. They didn't know quite what that was, and I'm not sure we know right now. In regard to the policy, the actual policy that Uber has or Lyft has, there's testimony this morning about who can see that and when, and whether it's proprietary. So truly, from a legal perspective, once an accident event has happened, maybe it is at that point that there will be discovery in the legal arena, and there will be an examination of one policy versus another, and it's exactly what coverage is. But right now, if one side can't see the policy and the other, we don't know where there may be a gap, and there may be.
Bob, if I might ask a question now, and I have no doubt that what Joe and Nick have said, that their companies are doing what they're doing. And if I'm hearing you, there's no way of really determining, because who are they responsible for? Are they supposed to file? Are they given a lack of a regulatory authority? Are they supposed to file this with the insurance commissioner's office, or how do we know, in fact, that that's that it's in place, other than the word of corporate America.
Well, right now, suppose that's part of the discussion in the insurance committee and Richard Smith's committee as to what, if anything, is filed at the Department of Insurance. That's part, at least right now, that's part of a draft bill before that committee.
All right.
And I would indicate one other thing that I heard this morning, and in earlier discussions, that's been a straightforward kind of agreement to disagree as to when is there commercial activity. And from the discussion this morning, at least one school of thought was that from a transportation network standpoint, or Uber or Lyft standpoint, commercial activity begins when there's a match and concludes, it sounds like, when that matched passenger gets out of the vehicle. Another view of that is that commercial activity would begin when the app turns on and a driver is seeking a match. They're seeking a match for presumably commercial purposes, and that the commercial activity would conclude when the driver turns the app off and is no longer seeking business. That's the arena in which there's been discussion in the insurance committee, and that discussion continues.
Questions from the committee?
I don't believe. Thank you for bringing that forward. There was not a study committee formed on this. It was more or less informal discussions during the off season. Correct? There was not a study committee to study specifically the insurance for for-hire transportation. This is more or less just ongoing discussions with the various industry participants and the House insurance chairman and so forth. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, I think so. At the instance of the House chairman, correct. But it includes the transportation network folks that have testified here today and earlier.
Thank you. And in addition, I understand Uber and Lyft wanting to maintain their competitive advantage and privacy. Having said that, can you, Bobby or Stacy, imagine a commercial policy that would cover for-hire drivers in Georgia that is not specifically on that? It's not a for-hire. It's not a what am I trying to say? A commercial policy for a particular individual driver. Can you imagine an insurance policy that would be in effect and valid and legal in Georgia that would be more or less structured as they've described as more or less an umbrella policy over all their drivers and so forth? Is something like that conceivable in your mind?
I think there's a couple of components of that. One, to talk about legal in Georgia, as you know, there can be surplus lines coverage. So generally that's not as constrained in the law as what we refer to as admitted carriers. So a State Farm or somebody being admitted, they have parameters and approval processes of forms and rates with the insurance department versus the surplus lines industry, which is what I assume these types of policies are. They're a little freer in how they do it. And then second, the jurisdiction that oversees that policy, such that there is oversight, may in fact be a domicile somewhere else. So if this policy is issued to Uber and then it's issued in California, whether or not the Georgia department is even aware of it is certainly a question, and there may not be a reason for them to be aware of it. As to legality, I guess there are a couple of components there as well. There'd be one, the legality of, does that policy rise to the level of what Georgia law requires for financial responsibility laws for operating a motor vehicle?
Liability and so forth. Exactly.
And if it is written in terms of a contingency or a drop down or a possibility, whatever the factor is it appears that it would be left to the discretion of a third party to determine whether or not they're going to provide coverage. So I don't know that that would rise to the level of the law that says you must have coverage.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of goes to the issue we talked about earlier, consumer protection. You don't want to have declaratory judgment action against the private passenger automobile carrier saying you do or don't have coverage, which the surplus lines carrier, if that's what it is, may or may not join in and say, yes, you do have coverage, we're not paying, and that drags out the process for an injured party. So can't answer whether or not things are legal or not, but I think that's kind of the universe of issues from a compliance standpoint.
Do you have any concerns in regard to the start-stop mechanism that they've mentioned in this policy, such that once I contact an Uber driver on my smartphone, that, or maybe when I get in the car, whatever that starting point is, that's when the commercial coverage takes place, and it ends when they step out of the vehicle, versus a coverage policy for a limo or a taxi where it's, I presume, 12 or 24 hours a day or what have you. Does that cause either of you or the industry as a whole concern when you're selling P&C insurance policies for taxis and limos that are covered 12, 24 hours a day versus a stop-start mechanism in some of these for-hire transportation companies such as Uber and Lyft? Is that disparity in regard to the insurance coverage, is that cause of concern for you? Could there be technicalities in regard to right, things like that?
Right. Well, go ahead.
There are concerns because it's new, and it didn't exist 5 years ago. There will be interpretations as disputes arise. I think the goal in some of these conversations would be to make it as a bright line as possible, so that there are fewer disputes, so that when there's an injured party, the resolution is quicker and it does not drag out in courts over time. One possible parallel that comes to mind in terms of on, off, and start, stop would be in the world of workers' compensation, where there's coverage when one is at work and in the course of that activity, but not when they're not. That's generally a brighter start, stop, and maybe as compared to what we're describing here, it may not happen as many times. That'd be once or twice a day as opposed to what's described here.
Okay. That's all for me, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Rutledge.
So is it safe to say that there hasn't been any disputes or any accidents in Georgia so far? Are there? Do we know?
I don't know the answer to that. When you say accidents or disputes, I assume you're relative to an Uber driver or a Lyft driver. I don't know. There's been the anecdotal discussion about an accident in San Francisco that has driven much of this conversation. But it would be unrealistic to suggest that there wouldn't be one coming.
Very good. I don't know a whole lot about nothing when it comes to insurance, but it just appears to me as I sat there and I heard yesterday and then I heard today the business model for the, quote, liability insurance, and, we're living in a different time. I mean, this is new. We're breaking grounds. Business is breaking grounds, but there's something that remains a constant to me, and if I'm wrong, certainly feel free to tell me. But when it comes to insurance coverage is based on losses. Whether you're covered for 24 hours a day for the entire operation of a, quote, public livery service, or if it's for 20 minutes in spaces, they're going to be paying the premiums. Because there's one thing I know for certain, the insurance companies ain't going out of business. But my concern is that, quite frankly, with breaking new ground, there's a couple of things that struck me that, in the possibilities of doing the enhanced background for the public safety, there's a reason that other areas are controlled, either in taxis being controlled by the municipalities that be sure that XYZ takes place, or limos where the Department of Public Safety guarantees. And I'm sitting here reasoning, and it struck me that while I'm sure that the gentlemen from California are truthful in what they're saying, how do we know? How do we know as a state? As a state government, it is our responsibility to the public to ensure that there is a certain code of conduct. And the laws of this state mandate that you have liability coverage from last session, one of the things that came out time after time in the hearings on this issue was we had to take a word about it, and we found out that the X-model drivers, at that time, we didn't know, nothing was ever said to us about this insurance plan back last session. But one of the things that we heard loud and clear from the insurance industry was, well, if you're driving your personal vehicle and you're driving with a normal insurance, P&C insurance on your vehicle, that's not a commercial coverage. So if it had been an accident, that client, that customer out there didn't know that they were covered. And that's something that would be groundbreaking, clogging up our court systems with litigation. So I'm guessing at this point there needs to be some kind of process to be sure of that responsibilities are being met without trying to be as least cumbersome to the business models as we can. But questions? Bobby, Stacy, I thank y'all very much. And I'm sure y'all going to be hanging around to ask questions since we'll have a couple more members here tomorrow.
Yes,
I'm
sir.
hoping. Thank you so much. Do we have anyone here from the Georgia Motor? What is Georgia Motor? Is that Abby? Do we know who this would be? Beg your pardon? Is that Mr. John Keys? Is he in attendance? If he's not, then we'll pass by that one. Let's see what time we have. All right, we have the GBI with us. Since the whole gist of this issue has come to play on the background checks and proper vetting and verification, would y'all come up and introduce yourselves, identify yourselves, and since y'all have a badge and a gun, I'm not going to request that y'all give a fingerprint, but would you like to bring your colleagues up with you? Sherry? Well, that's one thing this committee is full of, and that's morals. Welcome. If you would, tell us a little bit now. Y'all represent the, y'all work for the GBI, the preeminent investigative agency in the state. But also at the GBI, y'all are the home of what's commonly referred to as GCIC, that's linked to NCIC, that's the criminal history. In discussions with these folks, you know, and I'm certainly, you know, times change, and maybe I'm wrong, but, you know, the public, I've always said that the public has a right to ensure that those people that they're hiring to drive them have been properly vetted for background checks. Currently, the Department of Driver Services that issues a chauffeur's attachment to a driver's license, they have certain criteria that they go by. One is that there's a GCIC report to ensure. As you have heard, the good folks with Uber and Lyft, the new venue, that they do their own. They use third-party investigators. And I guess maybe you could parallel the difference in that as the professionals. The cities regulate the taxis, and I'm sure from town to town, city to city, their requirements as far as background checks are probably different. I do know what the limo, since the state regulates and, quote, licenses the limo operation, so I'm very sure what they do, but maybe could y'all just sort of, for the sake of the committee, bring us all up into speed and maybe a parallel as to what y'all's this type of operation would mean as opposed to third-party testing or third-party investigation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Neil Gerstenberger. I'm the Assistant Deputy Director for Information Services in GCIC, and I'm here with Terry Fisher. She is the Deputy Director for GCIC.
Terry, I'm sorry, your last name?
Fisher. As you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, we are the criminal history repository for the state of Georgia. So anytime an individual is arrested for any felony or misdemeanor offense that the AG has designated to be a fingerprintable offense, those fingerprints and all the demographic information is provided or sent to us, submitted to us. That will either initiate or create or update a criminal history record for that individual. So everything that we have is fingerprint based, and the fingerprint then becomes the positive identification back to that individual. That information then is all updated by the law enforcement or criminal justice agencies as that process, that arrest works its way through the process. Which is then that positive identification. When these individuals or the corporations, the companies that use the third-party checks, those are name-based checks. We certainly do not discourage, we encourage these organizations and entities to certainly check other public databases, the Georgia Sex Offender Registry, the National Sex Offender Registry. Those are separate and apart from what we do, which is purely the criminal history record. Name-based checks are just what they say. They are based on the name, sex, race, date of birth that the individual provides to the employer or the corporation, whoever it may be. I have a unit that works with individuals that have problems with criminal history records. We take thousands of phone calls a year. And I provided Mr. Massey an article that I co-authored with one of my managers entitled Pitfalls of a Name-Based Criminal History Background Check. We can provide that certainly to you, Mr. Chairman, and the committee. One of the issues is you have what we call a false negative. I get arrested. I say, I work at GBI. I'm going to provide my brother's name, my brother's date of birth, my brother's social security number. So then, if I'm ever run it in the future, that would be a false negative. It would come back saying that I don't have a record. When in fact I do. My fingerprints are on file, but it's with someone else's information. The other problem that we run into, and we also have what we call a lobby office. People come in every day because what happens is what we call a false positive. They've gone to get a job or be licensed through some company and do a third-party background check. That company's come back and say, we're sorry, Mr. Smith, but you have a criminal record, false positive. Well, no, I really don't, because my brother, my cousin, somebody else used my name, my date of birth, my sex, my race, so it came back based on that name-based search is showing that I have a record. We call that a false positive, or there's just some problem with their criminal history record. So what we do is we fingerprint those individuals right there at GBI. We run their fingerprints through the state database and provide them a certificate back. That certificate may say Mr. Smith does not have a record in the state of Georgia, or it may say he does have a record. It could say he does not have a record, but additionally someone else has used his information. Which is why it showed up on that name-based check. Back to the entire public source documents, none of that information would be available on a public source document were that person not arrested. So when they talk about checking public source databases for criminal history stuff, it wouldn't be there had the individual not been arrested.
Do you want to address how quickly the database is updated too, and how often, we're constantly refreshing our database?
As Terry mentioned, when an individual is arrested, that is applied immediately to our data. The database is updated immediately. It's a real-time database. So when an individual is booked in at wherever agency, everything comes electronically. Once that booking officer hits transmit, that criminal history record is either created or updated with that information. Similarly, with court dispositions, as soon as the case is concluded, the court clerk or the DA or whomever has the ability to enter that disposition immediately onto the record, so that record is then updated at that point and is complete. We had an instance some years ago when GBI still had the firearms program where an individual was arrested. It was a family assault or family domestic violence kind of situation. A couple hours later, he went to buy a gun. The gun dealer said, "I'm sorry, Mr. Smith, you've got a record." And he was very surprised to know that the arrest that had happened 4 hours ago was already on his criminal history record, and he couldn't buy the gun.
You
So-
don't get the same thing from these third-party checks because they don't have access to that data immediately. They buy this data in bulk, or they go out to these courthouses. They have to do research. So when you do a fingerprint-based check, you're getting the most current information on an individual.
If I might ask, what I'm hearing you say is what some of us know, that y'all are just putting in a little bit more technical language, but fingerprint-based is actually probably more the official to eliminate false positives, so that where the companies rely on third-party testing or third-party investigations, they go here, they go there, they're only picking up that information that's there. They're not picking up the official criminal background. And also in certain cases, that somebody, say someone from California moves to Georgia, or say that Bruce moves to New York, fat chance of that, but there's no way, unless you check the GCIC and you use the fingerprint base to eliminate the false positives. That is the official record.
Yes, sir.
And even to the benefit of prospective drivers, that a third party may pick up false positives out there, that it could be clarified with the GCIC report.
And like I say, I sign hundreds of those letters a year where those people have come in because there's been, either a misidentification because it's based on the name, or something with their record where someone else has used it. And so we run their fingerprints through to provide that actual criminal record or non-criminal record.
Let me ask a couple of questions, and this maybe I'm hoping y'all can answer this for me, because y'all deal mostly in the criminal area. In discussions with the companies, with these companies and others, one of the things they had expressed several concerns was that Uber, obviously, they hate government, they hate bureaucracy, and they're not by themselves. But it is what it is. And one of their concerns was they didn't want to have to submit to fingerprints, because at first the argument was they didn't want to have to go down to the city hall or to the police department or wherever. Then we find out you've got a company that's a commercial company out there that if you want to get your gun license or you get anything that needs a fingerprint, then you can go to them at UPS stores in various locations, and they do a scan as opposed to the old ink blotting. And they'll do a scan of it, and then it is sent to the GBI for that. Now, I understand there's got to be a chain, because you don't want to give me my GCIC report and then me go take it somewhere that I might actually change it. So there's got to be a chain. Now, in discussions with them yesterday, we talked about the possibility of allowing anyone in the public to enhance the background check to be sure for the verification of government purposes. That if we could work out a system, say that a GCIC, say they have an applicant for a job. Well, the burden's put on that applicant that you go and you get your fingerprints taken. It is sent to the company. The GCIC report will be sent to the company. And the company, and possibly a double copy, I guess, could y'all send 2 copies? I know that y'all do it on secure electronic files of transmitting these things. Say I went to a company and I had my fingerprint. I want to send it to, say, Uber or Lyft as a corporate entity, but to send it to DDS, instead of it going through them to send to DDS, could that background check, the GCIC report, be sent to 2 parties? The company that's paying for it and sending it to DDS at the same time. Can you send out 2 copies of a GCIC report?
Yes, with the individual's consent.
Yeah,
Sure.
I mean, everything's done off the individual's consent.
Sure.
All right? So possibility, if a system was in place for the convenience of the industry, that their applicant had their fingerprints done, GCIC was run on the applicant, a copy was sent to the company, to the corporate America, plus one was sent to DDS. Corporate America looks at it. They still want to be sure that they're doing their third-party investigation on the morals and that may not always be shown, and they could decide whether they want to carry forward with that licensee being granted a a license or an attachment as a public that signifies that that is a non-criminal. Could that be done?
Well, if we're talking Georgia only, yes. Once you start talking, if we're going to do a federal check, then no, it becomes much more convoluted. But when you're talking about just doing a state of Georgia check, we can work that out. Yes.
But when we start checking federal databases and federal criminal history records, then it becomes, we come into the FBI purview, and they've got a whole list of rules on who we can share that information with and who that information cannot be shared with. If it's a governmental agency, they allow that criminal history record to go back to the employment or licensing agency. But if it's a private entity, then we go into a whole different realm with the FBI at that point in time, and that's outside.
But that's also in effect right now when
Yes.
it comes to the chauffeur's attachment
That's
process.
right, and that's why it goes back to DDS.
Correct.
And not to the chauffeur agency.
So basically, we need to keep it very simple and basically deal with the Georgia reports.
Yes, sir.
All right. Questions? You stick to the insurance.
Well, I guess if a potential Uber driver had recently moved to Georgia and had a criminal record in another state, how are we going to know that?
That's correct. You're right about that. That's where we come into the pitfalls there, and that's where their
So you
third-party
can't-
background check may come into play. But you've got to rely upon the individual to say, we just came from that other state, for them to do that third-party check. Otherwise, they're not going to know to reach out to those other states to get that information. So.
Right. The Department of Driver Services has 7 laws that allow them to get state and FBI fingerprint background check information, which you may know. So that's how they're able to get that. So we have to fall into the purview of DDS or some state agency to then make that licensing and fitness determination on behalf of.
So you're saying that for say for the Department of Driver Services, if they are the authorized as now to grant a permit, then you're saying the GCIC request should be going through them.
Well, we're not saying exactly it should go through them, but they might be the logical choice of a state entity to make that decision.
And they could in turn ask for the report
Yes.
or authorize a report upon the request of a driver.
Correct.
There would have to be state law passed specific to this class of applicant. Similar to chauffeur, there would have to be another law passed, or would have to be added. That class of applicant would have to be added to, say, the chauffeur legislation.
Or basically combine anyone for the definition, anyone that is a for-hire driver,
Yes, sir.
whether it be transportation referral, limo, taxi, uniformity.
Yes, sir.
Very good. Very good.
Can I come down and file my fingerprint? I got some crazy cousins. I'd like to go ahead and.
You can do a record inspection, can't you, Neil? Yeah.
Sure can.
All right. That way y'all wouldn't be the issue. Y'all would just be the one that are doing it at the request of DDS. then.
That's right. We're just a database, and then the information goes back to the entity that makes the decision, the licensing or employment decision. They were the ones that make that determination, not GBI.
But it has to flow through GBI.
Yeah.
The FBI requires it to come from the state up to them and then back to the authorizing. Well, it goes back to us and then goes back out to DDS. But in the end, DDS receives that information.
All right. Any questions? I want to thank y'all. Y'all just ought to hit us right there with one thing that I was part of this equation. Oh, I see Lawrence back there. Well, we're not taking testimony from you at this point, but if you got a specific question, I see you communicating.
It was more of a response, and I can let the Uber guys answer more directly. But I believe that they do a multi-state check regardless of a request. So it's automatically done. If a driver comes on, they check maybe the whole country. But I'll let them elaborate.
That's correct. It's a nationwide search. We described it before, so the situation, and I don't mean to contradict what the lady said, but that is not.
But it is a static database that you have. It's not, I mean, how often is it up? I mean, how often do you receive data?
So to that point, we use separate companies, and we're, like I think I mentioned before, we're constantly trying to improve the processes because this is such a
where they've lived right in the past? I mean, are y'all doing some type of verification on the places that they've lived and making sure that they're consistent so there's not a gap, so that I went off somewhere and committed crimes in, Alabama or something like that, and I left that gap out when I provided that, information to you so that you know to go to Alabama. And I mean, Georgia's got 159 counties. Are y'all going to all 159 courthouses where you're doing this?
So it's a great point, and that's what we're trying to constantly improve. But so when somebody is on board, and I think it's the same for these folks, they have to provide their driver's license number, and then they have to provide their social security number, date of birth, name, all that stuff, and then we draw from a multitude of different things, and we cross-check and try to get as much data as possible. And so I appreciate the point that you're making, but I think it's the same. It's just the flip side of the same coin that you all have to deal with. And there's a challenge with how do we make these databases the most up-to-date as possible, and we're just not the fingerprinting. It's the most, it for our purposes, will satisfy the multi-state requirements that we need to do for our job.
And we're just telling what we've seen in the previous experience. Our criminal element is not the most truthful group of people in the world, and we do have numerous Social Security. They find the person's Social Security number, they use that. They have a tendency to make up a lot of stories and everything like that. And what you go back to is the fingerprint is the most sure form of, identification on an individual. We can't lie about that. And I'm not saying that y'all's thing is not good, but we just want to make sure that the people that we are identifying, those people who should be identified, and fingerprints are the way to do it. So.
And I think, too, again, that information, like I said, wouldn't exist at the local level had it not, if it wasn't on the state database, number one. But number two, run through the back of my mind is an economical thing, because I don't know what it costs you to go to all 159 courthouses. But you could run one set of fingerprint cards through us and find out what that if that individual has a criminal record in Georgia.
Right.
And from an economic, then instead of sending people to 150 all scattered all over the state, you go, okay, look, I'm going to check you in Georgia. We'll see how truthful you are. Yeah. Because you do or you don't based on those fingerprints.
Right. But so it's a great point.
No,
I'm fixing to put in.
It's a great point, but I think from our perspective, we're going to be held to this standard of safety that it's incredible. I mean, we live in such a litigious society, right? And we're going to be held to this. I mean, as these, there's a ton of news about this all the time. We have to go above and beyond, and unfortunately, in a lot of jurisdictions, and I'm not saying these are state levels necessarily, but in a lot of city jurisdictions, like Boston, for example, 10% of the background check folks that went through the government process background check to become cab drivers then tried it. 10% of the former cab drivers that tried to come onto our system were not able to clear our background check because there were things that were lost and things that were missed. And we have similar stories in Washington, D.C. and a bunch of other markets, and possibly even here in Atlanta. And I should.
So y'all make more stringent requirements in the
and that's right. And that yeah.
Of course, but I think an important piece is just that we can't afford to. We have to pay the cost regardless. Mm-hmm. And from our perspective, if we have to go then through another hoop that, obviously you're the official work, the official record for the state of Georgia. But if there are things that didn't make it onto that record, like a local courthouse didn't have any follow-up action on a DUI, for example, and then after 2 years it never made it onto the record because it was expunged, or however I don't know the proper words here. I mean, I know that these are issues, and we have to make sure that we're trying to catch DUIs up front, regardless of whether there was an action on it or not, because we're going to be held to a standard if we let people that can drive drunk.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So that's our concern.
All right, let me wind this up. Lawrence, you're not going to be recognized anymore. But it did bring, and it gave me pause to think about a little bit different. Since, and I'm sure that the two companies and future companies out there, that they do want to be sure they're doing things. But I think there's one point that you're missing. You're still corporate America. You're not the government. At the end of the day, the government has a final say to verify what y'all are doing. And it's just gave me a little bit more clarity about how this process needs to work. I want to thank y'all. I want to thank y'all. And we will be back talking to you at the next committee meeting when the full public safety meets in January. All righty. Are y'all ready for lunch? Yeah.
It's 12:28.
All right, it's 12:30. We're going to take, well, wishes, guys. 30 minutes, 40 minutes,
I'd say 30 minutes to come back.
30 minutes for lunch. And we'll see y'all here at 1 o'clock. Now that we've got this app-based intercom system back working again. Hope everybody had a good lunch. This afternoon session, we're going to talk with just a few folks to get a better understanding of, as I'd said at the start of the meeting today, limousine carriers are regulated by the Department of Public Safety, MCC, and taxis are regulated by local governments. And we're going to deal, we've got three, I'm going to group them together, the Taxi Bureau, the City of Atlanta, and the airport. Not necessarily in that order, except for the lovely Dolores Watson Brown is going to be the first up. Then we're going to have ACCG, GMA, and we've got the Chiefs Association to address this today. Ms. Brown, welcome.
Thank you, sir. Committee, I am Dolores Watson Brown, Interim Director of the Atlanta Police Department Vehicle for Hire Section. To start, I want to cover the definition of a CP&C because I'll refer to it later. It is a Certificate of Public Necessity and Convenience. It is a permit or a license that each taxi vehicle must have to operate within the city of Atlanta. The Atlanta Police Department Vehicles for Hire Section permits and registers over 3,500 drivers, 1,555 vehicles, and 2 horse-drawn carriage companies for a total of 12 horse-drawn carriages. We perform random and scheduled vehicle inspections. They're required twice a year. Company inspections, as well as monitor vehicle for hire hearing panel proceedings, and also carriage, taxi cab, and limousine services throughout the city of Atlanta and Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. Our mandate is to ensure compliance with city ordinances and regulations, in addition to all applicable city and state laws. The City of Atlanta Vehicles for Hire program is governed by the City of Atlanta Code of Ordinances, Chapter 162 in its entirety, and Chapter 22, which deals with aviation. There are a total of 1,600 CP&Cs in the city, and these are similar to what are referred to as medallions in cities such as New York. 1,555 are currently assigned to one of the 21 companies authorized to operate in the city of Atlanta, and 45 CP&Cs remain with the city. To become a permanent driver in the city of Atlanta, the individuals must complete a systematic alien verification for entitlements form, also referred to as SAVE affidavit. It must be notarized. By executing this affidavit under oath, it's to become an applicant or a taxi driver for the city of Atlanta. The applicant is verifying their citizenship status, that they are of the age of 18 or older, and they have provided a secure and verifiable identification document as required by law. They must also present a valid state official identification showing residency for at least 1 year. They must provide proof of citizenship, either a birth certificate, certificate of naturalization, or permanent resident document or work authorization document. They must also submit a name change document if applicable. They must complete a fingerprint card, also provide us with a certified motor vehicles record or MVR covering the past 7 years. And when they submit it to us, that document must not exceed 30 days old. And they need a letter from the company for whom the applicant is going to work, showing the assigned CP&C number. After all of those documents are received by Vehicles for Hire section, to include a completed background check, the applicant is required to do the following. They must take and pass an English proficiency test. They must complete a 3-day ambassador training course, a total of 24 hours. They must then pass the ambassador test, which consists of comprehension and map questions. After passing the test, the permit is issued and vehicle is thoroughly inspected. Once the driver and his or her vehicles pass all phases of the process, they are authorized to operate a taxi
for hire, as a taxi for hire within the city of Atlanta. To remain current after the initial permit is given, they must go or undergo vehicle inspections twice a year. They receive annual ambassador training, or 8 hours per year, and the background check is conducted each year. Do you have any questions for me about the process?
Questions? Go right ahead.
My name is David Bennett. I'm Senior Policy Advisor in the Mayor's Office. So we started a taxi conversation about 2.5 years ago when the Mayor asked us to look at our current regulation system and see if it could be brought up to date. The conversation you guys are having now came along in the middle of that conversation. So we were looking at updating our system for taxis and had no real thought that this system that you're looking at would come into play. And as we got into learning how the taxi system worked and what changes it needed to be brought into a modern regulatory scheme, Uber and Lyft and Sidecar and others, sort of all moved into the city. As we sort of went through that conversation, we met with various parties who had interests about us regulating or not regulating in that space. Our law department was pretty clear that that was not our fight, that it was to be decided by the state. And as you look at the regulatory system that exists today in the city of Atlanta, the debate you guys are having now is very important to how that could play out over time. As what we've been advised by our attorneys is that we regulate as a local government in Georgia under the standard that a taxi is really defined by its ability to stop at a taxi stand or street hail. But if they are hired for a service that's prearranged, we don't regulate those companies. You do, or can. And so that distinction could allow companies in the city of Atlanta that are regulated under our current scheme to choose to deregulate if they choose not to street hail and stop at taxi stands. Someone's going to have to decide whether they think that's a good idea, bad idea, not our place to say. But if you look at how the system itself works, there are companies today that actually essentially work that model in our system. And whether they currently need our regulation or not is debatable. I think they need your regulation, for sure. And so basically you have an industry here that is, what we found is very much in flux. And looking for the state's guidance really as we finish our regulatory conversation about whether this is a place where the state should regulate in total, or the city should be changed in what they do, or what we should, if we should continue essentially the same scheme and see how it plays out.
Questions? You got anything else to say, David, or are you just taking a pause?
No, I mean, I would just say that the last point for ours would be that what you said today, we completely agree with. And the city regulates here really primarily from a public safety standpoint. That's number one, is the goal is to make this service safe for the public that needs it. Why that matters is that we have a number of people in the city who need taxis to get around every day, so it's a very important. It's basically like an element of the public transit system in the city for many people. And beyond that, the number one industry in the city is tourism. And taxis are often the first sort of moment people have as they visit and when they leave the city. And so we found from the hospitality industry that when you have a conversation about taxis, Uber, Lyft, the whole thing, they are highly, highly, highly concerned. Because as guests come into the city, how they come into the city and move around, it's very, very important. That'd be it.
Mr. Carson.
Thank you for coming and sharing that. Let me ask you this. What exactly would be your objective in regulation? And secondly, who would be the one doing the regulation? When you're talking about Lyft and Uber and others operating within the city or outside incorporated city limits, who are you talking about? What level of government or agency would you be talking about when you say they should be under regulation? And secondly, what is your overall objective anyways?
So we didn't, on our side, when we were looking at our taxi reform system, we didn't really resolve that issue because, so we had of course the people from the taxi industry coming to the city saying, you need to regulate them, you need to stop them, you need to sort of keep the system as is. Whether we wanted to or not, our lawyers made it clear that we couldn't. And so we didn't have to decide what the right answer was because our lawyers said as a government in Georgia, you don't have the authority to regulate them that way.
Well, I understand, but I just heard you, unless I didn't hear you correctly, what I thought I heard you say is that you thought they should be regulated from a public policy standpoint.
Yeah, I said as we regulate in the vehicle for hire space, we regulate under the authority that you grant us, whatever that is.
Right.
In this case, it's only in the space where someone is able to street hail and stop at a taxi stand.
Okay.
If they do strictly prearranged service, they're not something that we can regulate according to our attorneys.
Okay.
And so in Uber and Lyft and sidecars, they came in, as we were discussing our regulatory changes, the lawyers came in and said that's not something that we can do. You know, the industry was coming to us saying, you know, please level the playing field for us.
Right.
And we said, sorry, you're going to need to speak to the legislature who would set the playing field up for that at that level.
Okay. Understood. That's all.
Questions? If I might ask a question, or first I want to ask Ms. Brown, would you mind leaving your statistics over here about from what you had said? And I appreciate the brevity of your comments. I wish everybody was that brief, including myself. Let me ask you too, as the director of the Taxi Bureau of Regulatory here in Atlanta, with this new changing of the industry itself, my concern has been the public safety background checks to be sure they're scrutinized. Y'all do that already with the city when it comes to taxis. If we were able to do a across-the-board system of doing the background checks, would that be of a benefit, takes y'all out of the mix of doing background checks? Would that be a problem to y'all?
That's an interesting question. Would it be a problem to us? We will do what we're mandated to do. Whatever the rules and regulations, the ordinance requires us to do, we will be positioned to do that. If you're asking if everyone should have the background check for public safety, I'd say yes, and also checked on a recurring basis. Every year, or at least every other year, people do things that's not necessarily brought to the attention of I'll say management, of whoever is dealing with the population of drivers. So to ensure public safety, to ensure that the public is properly protected, and even a homeland security issue, I'd say recurring background checks should take place.
Very good. Is there anything specific that y'all do in regulations that y'all think needs to be retained? And I'm saying if we say we do an across-the-board background process for background check for anybody who is a for-hire driver, which would be taxis, limos, transportation referral folks, and we do a common an across-the-board background check, is there anything specifically that as the city taxi bureau that y'all would need to retain, or you think would be important for y'all to retain authority over the industry in the town, in the city, that y'all regulate?
Sir, I'm not a politician. I'm not sure how to answer that. If the city is responsible for certain things and it's part of the charter or the ordinance and is included thereunder, then across the board I say yes. But if things are changing, I don't know what that answer should be. So I think that's a discussion to be had. I don't know what the answer is.
Well, let me give you, for instance, what if we said that, what if we want a cross-board uniformity on vehicle inspections? To say that if you are a licensed driver, that you're responsible to keep your vehicle in proper operational order, as opposed to having to report twice a year, as taxis are in the city for an inspection, or once a year as a limo. Basically put the burden on the individuals that are operating so that they're keeping their own vehicles up. Because once upon a time in Georgia, we had vehicle inspections for everybody in Georgia, and that went out of the wayside decades ago, because, quite frankly, it wasn't working. And so the laws that were basically in effect were that you're supposed to drive a safe vehicle. If not, law enforcement can stop you and cite you for an unsafe vehicle. Deregulation somewhat. How important do you think that part would be?
Let me try that for a second. So in the regulatory system that we drew up that we have not implemented yet, one of the changes that we made, which would be close to what you're talking about, is at present the city has a regulatory relationship with the 20-some-odd companies she mentioned and the 3,000 plus drivers and the vehicles. And what we actually decided as we went through all that was that's a crazy amount of work for us to chase all the drivers and all the people and all the things around to do that. And so what we sort of came up with was the idea that we would just regulate the companies. And we would tell the companies they have to have all their drivers and vehicles meet a certain standard. And they would be certifying to us every day, every week, every month that all their vehicles met that standard. And then what we would be in a place of doing through the Vehicles for Hire is auditing. So we would show up on Tuesday and say, you're certified to have these 25 cars, and all your drivers supposed to meet this standard. Do they, in fact, do that? And if the companies consistently fail to follow and keep their vehicles and their drivers in the same place, then we would have a regulatory issue with the company, not 3,000 different drivers, which I think is very close to what you're sort of talking about there.
And sir, in addition to the inspections, we piggyback with insurance, because at this point we have proof every month who has insurance. So there should be no lapse of coverage, whereas I'm not sure what other companies do to ensure that the individual that's driving maintains appropriate coverage without lapses. So we have stickers that go on the vehicles. They have to prove that they've got insurance each month. So that's a safeguard, and that's under public safety.
Very good. All right. Questions? Mr. Carson.
We've asked this from the Uber and Lyft people. Can you give me an estimate as far as the number of accidents or incidents and so forth in the taxis regulated by the city of Atlanta? Is there an accident? What kind of statistics would you be able to provide, if any?
None at this point. We would hear something if there was a complaint related to an accident where
Right.
something was hadn't gone through the system or the customer was not satisfied. I am not aware of any. That's something I can ask my folks to look at.
So from a regulatory standpoint, you don't report on that. You report on customer satisfaction as well as on the front end.
Correct.
In regard to certifying the driver. And so, okay.
The individual companies would have to answer that as to how many accidents their companies or their drivers get involved in.
And do you verify insurance coverage as part of, I think you mentioned that earlier, right?
Yes, sir, we do.
And that's for both for the company as a whole as well as the individual cars?
Correct.
Right.
Mr. Rutledge.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So explain to me the medallion and what these taxi and cab companies are paying to the city, and what revenue is generated for the city of Atlanta from all the
Permits cost $75 each. Fingerprint or background checks are $20 each. Vehicle inspection, $38. Notary services we don't charge for. If they get it done somewhere else, they may charge. And there are other fees or fines that we receive. If you want one number, and I'll have to do this off the top of my head, and maybe you can help if you remember, Revenue, it's about $2 million, a little more. And it fluctuates based on the number of vehicles we have in the system.
$2 million is
U.S. dollars.
Yeah, I mean, that's revenue generated by the taxi cab companies, or is that revenue going into the city coffers? I mean,
Going into the city coffers.
Okay.
And I should also mention that it's not, we're not for profit, so it just covers operating costs.
Yeah, so the taxi system is not a revenue generating system for the city. In fact, if anything, I'm sure it falls into the general fund, and if anything, the fees that we charge do not cover the cost to do all the public safety work we do to cover the service. And I guess a broader answer to your first question was, if you look at the way the system is set up in the city, there really are three major players out there in the world. There are the company owners, there are the CP&C holders, and then there are the drivers. And any of those three players can be one and the same, or they could all be different. And so as you sort of play through how it works on a normal day, all of those systems play out in some way, shape, or form. And the companies are guaranteed that people will drive for them, and they pay to drive for the companies. The drivers pay the companies to do that. They have to get themselves assigned a CP&C to do that as well. And so if you're a driver, you normally 80% of the drivers own their own cars, and they can own a CP&C, or they could rent a CP&C for someone or from the company that they have. So it's a really interesting, complicated system with a whole bunch of moving parts to it.
And just one more time, a CNPC stands for what again?
Certificate of Public Convenience and Necessity and Convenience.
Okay, that's it.
Well, thank y'all for coming up.
Thank you.
And if, Mr. Bennett, if you'd leave your contact information in case we need to get a hold of you or the mayor.
I appreciate y'all's help here, because this is a very complicated subject, and y'all weighing in will be helpful to whatever the city does.
Does that mean you're going to put me on your Christmas card list for this?
Definitely, because we appreciate y'all's help.
I know who you're not on their list.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Atif Said, now that we're learning so much more about this intricate subject, we're fixing to learn a little bit more about how it relates to the Atlanta International Airport.
Mr. Chairman, committee members, good afternoon. My name is Atif Said. I'm Director of Transportation, City of Atlanta, Department of Aviation at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. I'll give you a brief overview of how commercial passenger ground transportation operation and activity takes place, including permitting processes. For the purpose of this conversation, I'm going to divide the business lines into two, taxis and everybody else. Let me speak to taxis first, and then I'll come back and talk about the other commercial vehicle types. Any vehicle that within the city of Atlanta that has the CP&C number has the ability to come and work at the airport. The airport is essentially a taxi stand, for lack of a better term, within the system of the vehicle for hire taxi registration credentialing system. In order to do that, there are two things that they have to do. One is they have to receive a transponder that is affixed on the vehicle so we can monitor their activities within the airport. And the driver has to be registered and receive a card, a payment card, with which they make payments as they do business. I'll speak a little bit about that. Vehicle with a proper tag and a payment card has the ability to go into our holding area, which is a taxi holding area, to form a queue, and then when their turn comes up, they can come curbside. They're brought up in batches of 20 vehicles, and they load passengers as they become available. There can be as many as 300 vehicles in that system at any given time being processed through the system and waiting for their turn to be curbside. As they enter the taxi assembly area, their account is deducted $1.50 each time they come in, and that's the fee they pay for the trip that they end up taking eventually. So for for lack of a better term, an average transaction fee for a taxi to do business at the airport is $1.50 to the airport. They load the money in the card, and it's deducted by the AVI system, the transponder system, automatically as it tracks them. The City of Atlanta Code of Ordinances, Chapter 162 that Ms. Brown referred to, as well as part of Chapter 22 that deals with the commercial vehicle activity, is the primary framework for us to operate with the taxis. In addition to that, Vehicle for Hire provides the enforcement, as they told you earlier, arm of making sure the vehicles are abiding by the rules and they are properly credentialed, et cetera, et cetera. As far as all other commercial vehicle activity is concerned, you can divide that into revenue generating and non-revenue generating. In case of limousines and shuttle services that charge customers money to be able to take them places, that'll be revenue generating aspect of it, or courtesy vehicles that take people to hotels, motels, or off-airport parking will be considered a non-revenue generating. All of these vehicle types have to meet the state set standards and have to abide by the City of Atlanta Code of Ordinance, Chapter 22, which speaks to their use at the airport in order to work at the airport. In addition to that, they have to receive a permit from the Department of Aviation Ground Transportation Department, which anybody who meets those credentials has the ability to apply for. Once the permit has been processed, the vehicles, similar to taxis, receive transponders, so we can monitor their activity and provide them access to what would be otherwise a secured area for non-commercial vehicles. The drivers, in case of limousines, are also badged by our security department. This is based on a federal directive. For certain populations that do business at the airport are required to hold security clearance through the Department of Homeland Security, and our Department of Security processes those fingerprints to FBI and provides badges for these individuals accordingly. None of the other business lines are required to have that security clearance. Each and every one of these business lines also has a transactional relationship, so there's a permit fee, and the amount of money is different. There's application fee, there's permit fee. In certain cases, they're per vehicle fee. In certain cases, it's per transaction fee if they're using our facilities. And in certain cases, it's self-reported revenue percentage, 5%, 7%, depending on the revenue. I can leave you with a chart that shows you different breakdown of all those different fees, but I just wanted to make sure you know that there's transactional aspect to this relationship as well. As far as the enforcement of these other vehicles is concerned, Vehicle for Hire Department of the Police Department Vehicle for Hire Division also provides us through a memorandum of understanding enforcement for our rules and regulation, our permit language. They do everything for taxis, and when requested, they make sure that everybody's adhering to our rules and regulations and our permit language. We do not do anything that is within the state umbrella. Department of Public Safety handles that aspect of it. And that essentially is the way the system is laid out between those two categories. I'll be more than happy to answer any question. I'm joined by Ms. Joyce Tomlinson, who is our administrative supervisor and might be able to answer some detailed questions that I might not be able to.
Questions? Mr. Carson.
I have a question. Is it the FAA? I just wonder, under what authority do you have to charge the $1.50 fee? Is that from the FAA or is that from somewhere else?
All the fees that we charge that I spoke about are within the framework of City of Atlanta Code of Ordinance, Chapter 22.
Okay, City of Atlanta.
That
Okay.
lists all those fees. They're not an administrative fee. They're City Council approved.
And we've been having a discussion not just about fees and taxes, but also in regard to public safety. Can you describe the transponder that's on these taxis in regard to, can you just describe that for me?
So there are two components to a transponder system, a part that goes on the vehicle and the infrastructure that exists within the airport. At key points within the airport, there are readers that can read these transponders as they drive under them.
Does it work similar to a GPS system?
It works similar to GPS system with two key differences. One, it being physical structure, and secondly, that it also helps grant them access, physical access behind gate arms that otherwise would not go up through GPS system or similar technology.
Okay, so this transponder allows them to go through a particular checkpoint, a gate or something, and that's where they are deducted $1.50 from their prepaid account for this particular taxi cab or taxi driver, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, and can the transponder tell whether that cab or cab driver is in McDonough or Marietta, or can it locate the cab, or can it just only tell whether it's in the airport or out the outside the
That's
airport?
correct. Only the stationary readers, as it reads through those stationary readers, we can tell when that vehicle went through. So we can tell when they entered and when they exited and how long they stayed.
But you can't tell where they are once they leave the airport grounds,
That is
correct? Okay. When I heard transponder, I'm thinking GPS. And I was just thinking from a public safety standpoint. And you mentioned something about a card. Is that the card? Is that related to the $1.50 fee?
That is correct.
Okay.
In case of taxis, it is.
All right. That's all.
I might ask y'all only regulate taxis there. What about limos? If I know the limo can drop someone off, well, let's use limos and let's use the transportation referral folks. They can drop somebody off. Can they pick someone up at the airport property?
Anybody can drop off at the airport. So just to be clear, all modes of transportation, public, commercial, or otherwise, can drop off at the airport. We, like most airports around the country, around the world, do not monitor that part of the activity. To pick up at the airport, a limousine company, first of all, needs to have the company, the vehicle, and the driver properly credentialed to the state system. And then they have to go through our permitting process. If you do not meet the state criteria, if you do not have the proper credentialing from the state as a limousine company, you cannot apply for a permit. It's a prerequisite for you to meet all those requirements before you come and do business with us.
So if you're registered and licensed by the Department of Public Safety as a limo carrier, they also, like a taxi, have to register with y'all before they can pick up a client.
That is correct. They have to.
Even if that was a prearranged visit.
Limousines are exclusively prearranged, so there is no exception to that. Yes, that is correct. The answer is yes.
What about the ride transportation folks?
For who, I'm sorry?
The Ubers and the Lyfts of the world.
If the vehicle that is picking up and the driver that is picking up is properly credentialed, regardless of what the source of business is for them, they're okay to pick up at the airport. If they are not, they're in violation of our rules.
So if an Uber driver wants to pick up at the airport, they have to be registered also?
Well, before they can register with us, they need to have some kind of a legal framework, either at the state level, in this case at state level, or they have to be registered through the city's vehicle for hire taxi process. They can't come to us without either one of those and request a permit. We can't grant a permit without either A, them having proper credentials to the state, or having, actually I should say permits are exclusively unless or until they're approved by the state.
Well, now Uber and Lyft, this is a new type of a venue of transportation. They're not regulated by anyone. So can they, if a client that has an app on their phone, if they want to summon a Uber driver or a taxi or an Uber limo, black car model, to pick them at the airport, are you saying they can't do that? Those people can't come to the airport to pick up?
If they do, they'll be in violation of our rules and regulations, yes.
And have y'all prosecuted anyone or arrested or charged anyone with that?
Sorry, Chairman, go ahead. We have a process in place for anybody that violates the rules and regulations, not specifically targeted toward a subpopulation. And as such, during those normal activities of monitoring, if we do encounter somebody who's breaking the rules, if it happens to be a Lyft or Uber driver, they would have the same consequences as anybody else conducting business without permit.
Last question, if I might, from myself. How much revenue at $1.50 a clip? How much of the money is raised? Does this go to the airport or does this go to the city of Atlanta?
So just to be clear, this is for taxi cabs only. The $1.50 is for taxi cab only. Our
not limos.
Different. Limos, if they use our vehicle lot that is very specifically designed for them to do, there is a charge that ranges between $1 and $1.50 depending on the size of the vehicles. But that's not the only option they have. They can always pick up curbside without having to pay that fee. But they do have per vehicle fee of $100 as well as $20 application fee. And that's the reason I want to leave that chart with you. It's complex and hard to explain. But in case of taxi cabs, we can do 600,000-700,000 trips. So, $1.5 million. But I want to emphasize that in aggregate, all the fees that we charge for commercial vehicles do not have our operation break even. It is designed as a revenue neutral expense recovery model, but we do not generate enough revenue to meet all those requirements and all the services that we provide.
Basically, the cumulative total is what pays for the real estate that they park on, is what it is.
As well as staffing, permitting staffing, regulation, et cetera. So there's a team of about 13 people that is dedicated to ground transportation for a multitude of reasons. And then we have contractors that provide additional services in sense of logistics for these service providers, customer service, et cetera. So within our cost center, there's several activities that fall within that.
Very good. Mr. Carson.
Approximately how many pickups are there between taxi and limos? And obviously, there's going to be more on a Monday and Friday versus, a Wednesday middle of the day. But roughly, how many pickups do you have, say, per week, per year? Do you have any stats on that?
Yeah, actually, I've got some numbers here. They're dated numbers. I can get you the latest numbers, but for limousines in this particular trip, I'm showing approximately 260,000 trips for limousines and approximately 627,000 trips for the taxis. So combined, about 1 million trips between the two modes.
1 million out of the airport every year. 1 million out of Hartsfield every year.
That is correct, yeah.
Between taxis and limos.
That is correct. The number is probably a little bit higher in recent years. This is a couple of years old.
I understand. Second question, is there a hotline that if people want to complain about taxi service or what have you, is there a number that they can call for the city of Atlanta or specifically taxis and limos from the airport?
Airport has several avenues for people to be able to submit their complaints for all services, including taxis.
Yes.
There's an online portal as well as there's a telephone number that they
Okay, so out of 1 million pickups, how many complaints have you had from taxi and limo pickups from the airport?
Unfortunately, I don't have that information in front
Okay,
of me right now.
I would really love to drill down to, okay, you have 1 million pickups between taxis and limos, which are regulated by city and state, respectively. How many complaints are there for those individuals, and what, if any, complaints are you getting for Uber and Lyft and transportation for hire companies? And that would be interesting. Obviously, you don't have the number of pickups because that's part of the whole issue that you're dealing with. So that was just an observation.
Any other questions? I want to thank y'all for being here, and please be sure we've got your information because we might need to be calling on you. All right. Mr. Frank Redondo. Good to have you, Frank.
Thank you, sir.
To the members of the committee that don't know Frank, Frank is the director of the Georgia Chiefs Association and is an excellent source of information. He does a lot of things besides talking about law enforcement. He really talks about reports, and he's going to try to do some interpretation of one for us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, my name is Frank Vincent Rotondo, and I am the Executive Director of the Georgia Association of Chiefs of Police. I have been employed by the Chiefs Association for 18 years as their Executive Director, but it bears mentioning that come January 17th, I'll be going into my 46th year in law enforcement, so that's a long time. A lot of things I've encountered over the period of years really have no bearing on this matter because this is new. But I can draw parallels with old policing problems associated with limousine and taxi driving if the committee wishes to ask those questions. What happened about 2 or 3 months ago, I went to the International Police Chiefs Conference, which was held in Orlando. And I belong to a group of executive directors. They have an executive director of every police chief conference, for every police chief organization in the state. And we were talking actually about this issue. I think there were three main companies involved, two that are right here, as well as a third sidecar. One of the paralleling associations, Virginia Chiefs Association, my counterpart indicated that she was on a committee that was impaneled by the state of Virginia to look at this very issue. And they did come down with some findings. I called her the other day and I asked her for a copy of the findings. I did present those findings to you. And in those findings, it was very well vetted document. It has an executive summary, and it's 66 pages, and I think that you indicated you were going to present to each of the committee members a copy of that document. Now, the executive summary is what I drafted my notes for, and I'll just go over those notes a little bit for you and add some input that I think is important and relevant to the point of the operations of the newer business model associated with picking up and dropping off passengers. They addressed in this document licensing issues, and with respect to licensing issues, it was very clear that what they're seeking for Virginia to have in their Virginia model code, or the model code for Virginia, whatever it may be called, would be that all licenses are to be held at a minimum standard for the distribution and the picking up of passengers, and I got the impression that's called a chauffeur's license, generally speaking, and that there be some oversight as to the fitness of the operator of the license, and that operator of the license has to prove the fitness with the form of insurance to be able to pick up and to deliver passengers, and that there should be fees paid associated to the respective government entities, whether it be state, in the form of taxes, or whether it be the city of Atlanta if they're doing business in the city of Atlanta, or even the city of Hiram, Georgia if they're doing business there. How they achieve that may be looked at if you look at the total document on their recommendation on how to achieve that. On the particular area of screening of drivers themselves, they set a criteria, and that criteria was a comprehensive background check. And that included not only a fingerprint check, which was requested to be the best means of doing the background test, the background check, but also a complete driver's check. And I'll get into that in just a little bit further as to what they were looking for when they're doing that. And they were firm in their belief that an arm of government should be the one doing the background check. And I presume that that arm of government is similar to what we have in Georgia, which is the GCIC division of the GBI, or it could be subcontracted out to police agencies to do it for whatever fee is necessary. And I go to my experience in this point. As part of my policing experience, I spent many, many years in major crimes. And I handled many, many arrests during my law enforcement career as a practitioner. And I've done an awful lot in the law enforcement arena in the 46 years, or even 20 practical years, absent of 20 practical years outside of this state, in another state. And I'm what is referred to as a damn something, but I can't quite figure out what it is. But I'm sure Representative Powell would articulate that a little bit better. But anyhow, the reality is that I really could not trust anybody to say anything to me about their past background as to whether they were arrested, whether they were convicted, unless I actually had a certificate in my hand which was produced by the governing authority of that state. And in fact, when I was a police chief in this state, I would not accept anybody's level of articulation as to what they were involved in before. They're as clean as the driven snow. They'd never been convicted, until not only do I have that document in my hand, but that document, which is the NCIC GCIC document, clearly says on it, it really is only good unless there's a fingerprint comparison done. So I say to you, and I encourage you, this is a form that we're looking at public safety, that I encourage you to do that through a government entity, to look at the fingerprint classification. Now, I realize we're not perfect, and the government certainly isn't perfect, and fingerprint classifications aren't perfect. But as you listen to the GBI articulate, people can say that there's an error here. and they have their alternative to look at, yes, correcting that error. There are so many people who have the name John Smith in this world. And how could you ever determine the real John Smith that you're looking at unless you had a fingerprint comparison? People exchange information all the time, and people are not necessarily truthful. So I encourage you to look at that as really a very strong point, unless you're so comfortable that the company does background checks and brings those prints directly or uses the live scan data program and ultimately is checked by GBI, and that GBI then has the cooperation of the NCIC division to be able to release that information. It's got to be done through a governing agency. Sex offender register. They should also clearly look, when they're looking at the background, to look at sex offender registry, not only the U.S. Justice Departments, but you know, Georgia has a rather involved sex offender registry. It too is totally not complete. So perhaps a further vetting in that particular area would be necessary. We often think of, and at least I do, not necessarily the older person looking at pulling up an app, but I also think of a lot of people at the universities, such as we already had heard testimony that the Athens area has so far they have a lot of the units running in the Athens area, which is perfect for university students going and to go forward and to be able to get some provided rides to where they needed it. So we really have to be careful of the sex offender registry. There were other attachments that the Virginia Association of Chiefs of Police, as well as the other people involved in doing this report, which, by the way, there are about 70 different divisions of government represented there, and in fact, the two companies that were here had representatives on that committee, just to let you know. So the findings came out. It doesn't mean that they agreed with the findings. It just meant that the findings integrated into that some of their thoughts and ideas onto how to be able to go forward with this. Think about violent acts, past violent acts. Think about felonies involving motor vehicles. Think about conspiracies to commit certain crimes involving motor vehicles. Think about criminal history checks on driver's licenses, particularly with underage driving involved and drinking. DUI, especially maiming, portion of DUIs, license revocations for repeat offenders. Also consider whether a person is prohibited and authorized from, or prohibited a law enforcement officer from taking a breathalyzer test. Although it may not be conclusive in a court of law, it is indicative that perhaps they were drinking, perhaps they were using drugs. These are variables that you as committee members will have to look at when you're looking for a complete background test. I don't know if the companies are looking at the same things that you are looking for to protect the welfare of the people of the state of Georgia when we're dealing with the public safety arena. The standards for vehicles. Of course, we know the vehicles should be titled and registered. We know that they are at least emissions inspected here. I say to you that maybe it should be a safety inspection, also in addition to the emission inspection. Also, as noted in their report, the vehicle should not carry more than 7 passengers, because then we're going towards a much larger type of vehicle. But I'd like to get to the insurance matter, which is a source of a lot of conversation here. Basically, they indicate in this report that they would like to see a commercial policy for insurance on it. It's nice to have the personal policies on it, but there's some question, at least in the minds of the drafters of this report, whether personal policies will be effective enough to safeguard the life and the property of people in those units. And going back, that these commercial policies, as well as the background test, should be done periodically, if not more often than that, because we know that people get involved. Similar to what the Atlanta Police Department does when they're checking and doing checks on the vehicle taxis when they give their medallions or their certificates. There were other requirements specified in here I'd like to ask the committee to look at, because it's like inventing the wheel again. We really don't have to. If you look at the committee people that were on there representing a lot of the government divisions, the private sector, the insurance industry, these are the people that came down with what are reasonable findings. They're going to use this document to craft legislation appropriate for their state in the very near future. Not last year's legislation, a modification of legislation this year. I think you'll find that document very, very worthwhile. They subscribe to the philosophy of zero tolerance when it comes to drugs and things of that nature. When we're dealing with public safety, taxes came up here, not specified in this document, but taxes are important to public safety. I mean, these law enforcement officers get their equipment, particularly the state officers, if you're paying state taxes by the state tax base. So yes, they should pay their fair share of taxes. So I could go on and on. The report is rather lengthy. It's 66 pages. I don't want to bore you anymore with my comments on it. I do believe, though, that this is certainly the wave of the future. I believe that this committee and other committees that get involved in looking at maybe changing other sections of laws can work out an equitable agreement with these two companies and any other companies, as long as those companies are willing to be resilient and bend a little bit to understanding that we have concerns. You're addressing the concerns in the public safety arena area. We're also addressing it on the insurance area. This committee is vetting it as carefully as we can, with the limitations of time and recognizing that we have a 40-day session coming up in front of us. I thank the committee, and I'll offer you any advice I could give to you from my experience sake. I just appreciate the opportunity to testify on this matter.
Thank you, Frank, for going over that Virginia report. Any questions from the members? No?
I apologize for missing part of your remarks, but I really appreciate you coming here and making time to do this out of your schedule. If you were in our position, having read that report and so forth, what recommendations are there? Specific recommendations in that report, or what? If you were in our position, what would you do in regard to Uber and Lyft? What would you do?
Well, I'm sort of a rule follower. I think you should establish strong rules up front, which includes insurance regulation rules,
okay,
and all other rules you find applicable, such as taxing regulations and things of that nature, and at least give it a shot, because you can't go back. It's harder to go back and try to strengthen it later than it is to just set the standards. If the companies wish to do business, and they will still make money, maybe not their margin of profit as high as they would like, if they have to pay for background exams with fingerprinting and things of that nature, or they have less drivers, they will still derive a profit from an industry which will be profitable now, and it will be profitable in the future. And you should protect public safety interests. You should protect the interests of the people who go in those vehicles in good faith that they will be protected. That is your responsibility as legislators, and I don't mean to tell you your job, but and you know it, and you know it well. And these companies we could work a very good relationship with these companies. They are very good companies. They appear to be stable. We just have to set the ground rules.
Thank you.
Very good. Frank, I want to thank you for taking your time to come, and thank you for bringing that Virginia report and going through it for us.
It made it easier on me. It's my Cliff Notes at 66 pages.
Light bedtime reading, I understand.
Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. All right. I see the Colonel is here. Colonel? Bring your entourage up. We have some very important people with the Colonel. And even better news, I had y'all down for tomorrow afternoon at 2:30, and this just really excites me that we won't have to wait around for y'all tomorrow, and we might actually get out of here quickly tomorrow.
Mr. Chairman, my calendar says today a little bit after 2, so that's why we're here.
You know, I'm just
You
chairman.
like us early, though.
I do like y'all being early. Thank you. Mark, we have, we've been discussing this issue, and you very well know what the issue we're talking about with this new day of transportation referral. As a matter of fact, if it wasn't for you, I never would have got involved in this issue when you told me about it a couple of years ago. We've had some discussions. We had a good bit of testimony. We had one meeting, then the one this morning. We've had a lot of testimony from the Uber folks learning their business model. The taxi industry will be up tomorrow. And most everybody in attendance knows that what we have is that limos are regulated by the Department of Public Safety, i.e. DDS does a chauffeur's permit as a background check. We understand that the taxi industry is regulated by the local governments. Then we also have the new technology-based transportation referral companies that are basically app-based. They basically is corporate America running their show. They do their own background checks. Now, one of the things that I have said that I maintain that is our duty to ensure the public safety by being sure that folks who are a for-hire driver have been properly background and vetted. As is coming out that the companies, they assure us that they do a good job, but still government has got to, in my opinion, we have a duty to verify what they're doing. That's where we are up to now. Is a public safety issue, i.e. because insurance is going to be dealt with by a different House committee. So that being said, that's just a little bit of background to where we are, and just like to hear y'all's comments at public safety. And if you would introduce these very special guests that you have here.
This is Major Johnny Jones. Major is over our Motor Carrier Compliance Division. When it comes to the folks that actually do the inspections on the limousines, the folks that actually go through the 25-point checklists, that 11 hours per individual that they go through, it's his people that do it. This is Jason Johnson. Jason is a captain at headquarters, and he is our legislative liaison. The issue for us brings up two things: the safety of the driver and the safety of the vehicle. And just as we have laws already in place to ensure that folks safely drive on the roadways and their vehicles drive on the roadways, a lot of different solutions can be thrown out there of what's already being done. When we look at the commercial motor vehicle aspect of this, we have commercial motor vehicle companies that actually certify their own drivers. And we do so through programs through DDS, where they have to meet criteria to do so, and then they use an audit fashion on an annual basis to ensure that the standards being met. Some of those folks actually do it through a private vendor. And so we have folks such as UPS in commercial motor vehicle, not transporting people, but a safety aspect that handles their own business. I'm a person that tends to look or like to look at a private solution before we turn to the government. I won't disagree with my friend Frank Rotundo, but I don't think we necessarily need a laundry list or a ton of regulation on the front end, because a lot of times when we overdo it and we tend to solve our problems with a sledgehammer instead of a fly swatter. So is this a fly swatter issue or is this a sledgehammer issue? I tend to see this as a fly swatter issue. If you look at what some of the other states are doing, if you look at what's being done as far as the regulation of drivers or the backgrounds that are being done or the insurance issues that are being done, I think that the committee should look at a more of a fly swatter solution to this whole thing than a sledgehammer. So is there room for that private entity to do those background investigations? I think there are, in the same fashion that we do what's done in commercial motor vehicles, as long as it meets a standard and there's a proper audit. And then if there are problems that arise beyond what is put in place, then we could adjust those appropriate at a later date. And the same thing can be done for the automobile. Right now, we do emissions testing. Who do we do that through? We do it through the Department of Natural Resources for the environmental protection. It's a stringent thing that's done, but who do they do it through? A private contractor, and they audit and monitor it. So I think that approach is probably more applicable to this than a set of bureaucratic laundry lists from the government. That's just my opinion. So if the committee looks at it in that light, to establish that standard both for the driver or the vehicle, I think that would properly apply here. As far as that, that's kind of our synopsis of the way we see it, and we'd be happy to answer any questions. I will not take as long as Frank Rotundo. I love him, but I won't take as long as Frank.
Thank you, Colonel. Questions? Any questions?
Thank you I appreciate it. And Jason, good to see you again as well. You had mentioned not a sledgehammer, but or what have you, but a fly swatter. Let me ask you the question I asked Frank. What would you have, forgetting for a moment potential risks, and I know that makes my chairman concerned, has there been any concerns the Georgia State Patrol has had currently or in the past in regard to past Uber usage, Lyft usage, so forth? Has there been any concerns, anything like that?
Haven't had a specific incident rise to the level.
Okay.
But as a father, I'd say, who do I want driving my daughter?
I understand.
The comment that Frank made about the kids at UGA, one of those kids are my kids.
Yeah.
And so if my kid, who's technologically savvy, calls up Uber, who is it that I want driving her? Well, I'd like somebody that's not a sex offender.
Sure.
I'd like somebody who has a decent driving record.
Sure.
I'd like somebody that's not a felon. The crimes of moral turpitude. Don't ask me to spell that, or don't ask me to have the laundry list, but I think we all know what we're talking about there.
Right, right.
So, has this person been convicted of vehicular homicide? So I think if we establish that list, and from that list allow a private vendor to do that, as long as we have an audit system in place to do that, I think that fits a good business model, and it fits where that fly swatter should be, and not so much a sledgehammer.
Private vendor for the background checks,
Yes,
in other words. Right. Would Uber or Lyft doing their own background checks, would that suffice as a third-party vendor, or would that be a conflict of interest for as you see it? Would that be a conflict of interest of them recruiting?
Some would say that it's a conflict of interest for UPS to certify their own drivers. But think about that. They have a business interest for their drivers to be as safe as possible.
Sure.
It's a self-regulating prophecy when they have good drivers driving their vehicles.
Sure.
That helps them when they go to their insurance carrier to get their insurance. Even though the discussion of this, so whether it should be a full commercial policy or a gap policy, look what we do in some instances for our health coverage. We have Medicare gap. I know I'm getting off on a tangent, but in the same reason there, we apply the right thing to the point, not this broad brush. And so when you take a look at where they're doing their business, when you take a look at, the amount of time that's actually involved in this, I think that if you establish that list and you allow that to be done by a private vendor, but you audit it just as DDS audits those programs with the commercial licensing issue, I think that the company has a vested interest to do the right thing, and if they're properly audited by government oversight to the right level, I think it meets it somewhere in the middle.
Okay. I don't have anything else.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Colonel, if I might ask you a question now, and I hear what you're saying about the fly swatter, and that's everything I've tried to do is try to keep it simple, but I've found there's nothing simple in this whole equation. One of the things I had recommended after hearing this morning was, since the Uber and the Lyfts of the world, they want to do their own vetting through a third-party investigator. And the standard, maybe I'm hung up on it, but the standard I've always said is, if you want to know somebody's criminal background, you run a GCIC report on these. Fingerprint them, do that.
There are open source reports, though, through the use of the person's Social Security number that provides the same information. And so you can get a good view under those open source to the use of Social Security numbers of where the person is.
So I'm asking you the question, how far do we need to go, or to even consider, as far as a background check? Because, as you know, DDS, and what I've looked at, is possibly to level the playing field between limousine operators and taxi operators. Taxis are, those operators are vetted and background by the cities. Limos, as you know, are done by the state. And the new day, these newer folks that are driving, to have basically an attachment on a driver's license, a driver public a for-hire driver, to have that on there that shows that they have in fact been vetted and properly background. What would you suggest would be the easiest way of doing this?
Well, I'm not against that. You're talking about a system that's already in place. You're talking about something that could easily be applied to this issue that government could do. So it's up to the committee's discretion. So I think, in my opinion, it could be done by a private source. It could be done.
I'm not going to let you off the hook this easy. Now, you talked about the fly swatter, so tell me about the fly swatter, Mark. I mean, how do we do this?
I think the private vendor is the fly swatter. I think when you get government involved, to the extent that you could overregulate, you bring the sledgehammer.
So would you be saying use the GCIC but let the private vendor utilize that, or let them use third-party investigation?
I think the third party would be the best to start.
Good deal. Y'all got an ally, guys.
Not an ally. I'm just saying, I mean, think about where we are. We have certain trends that point us where to put our people in the right place at the right time. I don't necessarily see a trend here where you have to put the right thing in a particular box of regulation or a particular box of rules. We do things, through data. We're data driven. And I don't see a laundry list of data where this is an issue. Or an issue to a great extent. So if you apply the same concept type of mindset of the regulation or the level of regulation that you're going to put on it, I don't see the data there that shows this as being an unsafe, out of control issue. If I applied the same thing, I would think back to what happened 3 or 4 months ago, where we had a taxi driver here in Atlanta that sexually assaulted or was accused of sexual assault. Well, if I took that one instance out of that industry and put a huge extra amount of regulation on it just because of that one instance, I don't think that's the right approach, nor do I think the taxi industry would think that's the direct approach. And look what we do there. Look how they are vetted, and look how they have a background check. But that didn't stop that necessarily, tragic issue based upon that. So, have we had a problem? Does the data show we have a problem here? I don't see an overwhelming amount of data, or I don't see any particular thing pointing to that there's a huge problem here. But it lends itself from our position to say what's the right level. You've asked me what the fly swatter is. I think that if it's a proper criteria given to a private vendor that's audited by the state, just like we do other things, it's shown through DDS or the commercial driver's license, and how we do that, I think the same model could be used, and that brings the right level to this issue.
Very good. Any other questions? Question about one of the things of trying to level the playing field. The cities, as we had understood, at least the city of Atlanta requires a twice-a-year inspection process on taxis. Limos, as prescribed by Georgia Code, y'all do the inspections on limousines.
Yes, sir.
Even though the state's not being paid per se, a one-time fee, they get a lifetime, and it's not a very good process for the state because you're a department.
We're not in the money-making business.
No,
we're not looking to collect fees.
In the same vein of what you've talked about the fly swatter and all, of trying to equalize the playing field between the transportation referral companies, limos, and the taxi industry. What would be your thoughts if we abolished the government inspections of vehicles and basically put this into the control of the owners, to say it is your responsibility to operate a safe vehicle and to have your own inspections done?
We do that in some instances, in some of the levels that we do in commercial motor vehicles, or we have incentives to do so. And there again, what's the right balance? In other words, if we go into a commercial motor vehicle carrier and we inspect them, and we provide that information and they meet certain criteria, they can subscribe to what's known as pre-pass. We laughingly refer to that as free pass, because what we've shown in that instance with commercial motor vehicles, when we pull in 100% of them to inspection, almost 40% of them are not in compliance with regulations. So there are those that use those type of programs to skirt the regulations and skirt those inspections. We've seen that element of it. So to broad brush do away with them, I don't think so. But in the same vein, we have seen throughout the nation other states who have gone through inspection stations that are privately run. They have 19-point inspections, 21-point inspections, 25-point inspections. What keeps those things viable is a proper audit system where we don't have essentially, if you go over to Joe's and pay the $20, you get your inspection sticker regardless. Well, if Joe's were properly audited by the state and he were running a proper inspection station, we would have a viable product. So I think it comes down to the same system where if we set the criteria, if we properly audit them, and that's the right level, that it could go to a private vendor.
So your guys who are currently doing inspections could actually be auditors for third-party inspectors.
Absolutely.
And then, of course, I think we need to keep the compensation that y'all are getting, where y'all are only getting a one-time, lifetime fee right now for regulatory authority.
It's easier to do is a lot more auditing to ensure the level of compliance of something like that than it is for us to actually do the inspections. Right now, I think we do 1,500 inspections a year or somewhere around that. And the fact of the matter is that is put with a part of our division that our funding through the federal government is dependent upon them doing a specific role, and that's the mix-up carrier. And when we take time away from that, we actually put into jeopardy that funding when we put more and more and more on them that divides their time instead of having them sticking with that strict requirement of their job that our federal funding comes from. So we have to be very careful when we see in a bill that DPS shall do the following, or motor carrier shall do the following, that we're not loading our existing personnel up with stuff that's going to take them away, that's going to jeopardize federal funding.
Can you tell me right off, is there anything under the federal guidelines that would have any impact on y'all if we got y'all out of the limousine inspecting or regulatory authority?
Not that I know. No, sir. As long as the inspection's being done, and like I said, we meet the if we get into the audit business, that we do a good job so that we have good compliance. And that's we're always going to have those that are going to do the wrong thing, and those are the people that you remove from the ability to be able to do that business.
Very good.
Most of your limousines are sedans and do not meet the definition of a commercial motor vehicle, so there's no problem with federal regulation. When we get into the problem is that when we task manpower with things outside of what we receive in federal funding for.
Johnny, how many employees does DPS or MCC have that deals with the inspections of limousines right now?
We have 9 geographic regions, and any officer within that region could be tasked with it. We have somewhere around 240 officers, and any officer in the region, according to where their level of training is at that time, could be tasked with it.
So if we actually got away from the active inspections and went to an audit type system, they would just be transferred over into doing audits instead of actually inspecting vehicles.
Yes.
Good deal. Question?
He's answering questions directly. He does not have a lawyer background.
Exactly, and he's not a legislator by chance. For the benefit of those in attendance, I think we need to give congratulations to Major Johnny Jones. He is now, since I last saw him, he has now been promoted to as basically the head of the motor carrier division, and it was a damn good promotion. It has been my experience that he doesn't tap dance around. He usually gives you a straight up answer, and I'm not used to that in all cases. Congratulations, Johnny.
Thank you, sir.
Colonel, if you don't mind, I'm going to be calling on you in the next few days. Maybe get your advice on some things. It seems like there's only one major part of the puzzle that I'm dealing with and trying to present, and that's how to deal with these guys from California. I understand that they do very well as far as, or according to them, they do well, but I keep telling them.
I think a set of immigration rules, Mr. Chairman, from anybody from California into Georgia would probably help you.
Well, it probably would make me feel better.
Right, yeah.
Especially if they'd move corporate headquarters here, but just is what it is. But I would like to talk to you a little bit more about my concerns about the government's role is to verify. While they make and do all of this stuff, is what I'd like to see is us verifying. It may be what you're talking about through an audit system. So if you don't mind, I'll probably be calling on
Yes,
you
sir.
in the next 2 or 3 days, and let's just have a discussion on that.
Absolutely, sir.
Before the committee starts rendering some reports.
Thank you, sir.
Y'all are happy back there. I see the Uber and the Lyft folks back there holding hands already. So.
Mr. Chairman, if I can just say one thing, the thoughtfulness of his remarks demonstrates his ability to overcome a Naval Academy graduate education, and I'm pleased to hear it.
You know, I would certainly offer you my advice that you need to leave well enough alone.
Go Navy.
Last but not least on the agenda this afternoon, and we're moving so quickly, it just really does thrill me. We have ACCG and GMA here today. We're going to let y'all partner together.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let's see. Is it on?
You're on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Clint Mueller. I'm the Legislative Director for ACCG. That's the Association of County Commissioners of Georgia. And we thank you for the invitation to come speak to the committee about a lot of changes that are going on in regards to transportation with the advent of all the new technology that we have today and how that fits into the world we've been living in. But before I make any comments, I'll go ahead and turn it over to my counterpart here at GMA and let him make his comments first.
Thanks, Clint. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Justin Kernan, and I'm with the Georgia Municipal Association. And thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak this afternoon. And I'm going to be really brief. And I just want to say that ride-sharing companies provide a unique business model that many people are excited about. Some of our cities have also expressed excitement regarding the technology as well as the business model. And our member cities are open to the idea of new efficient ways to transport people and add to the commerce of our municipalities. However, the question of fairness has arisen several times during this conversation. Taxis and ride shares, which essentially do the same thing, are held to different standards. And as of right now, we have 3 major concerns regarding those differences. Those concerns are public safety, sales tax, and local regulatory authority. Public safety, as a matter of public safety background checks and fingerprinting, we feel should be done the same way as are done for taxi drivers. Everyone has the right to know that they are being driven by someone who does not have a violent past or a record of a criminal assault or sexual assault. Insurance has been mentioned several times, so we won't dive too deep into that, but we feel that a component of making sure that people are safe while in the care of a driver is making sure that that passenger is properly covered. On the sales tax issue, I know one of the questions that we've been asked several times is how much sales tax or taxi cabs are throughout the state collecting. We don't have the answer to that question at this time. We've been trying to contact the Department of Revenue to find that out. We weren't able to get that information from that specific industry. We'll have a bill that we'll be speaking to you with Representative Carson, fair accountability and collection of taxes that would allow the Department of Revenue to share that information with municipalities so that we could answer questions such as that. We just feel that similar services should have similar rules, and regardless of the business models, cars still add to the wear and tear on our roads. Sales taxes help to pay for the repairs on those roads, therefore those vehicles should be paying taxes. As far as local regulatory authority, we feel that local governments should retain the authority to do the following: perform annual or biannual vehicle inspections, promulgate some type of passenger rights and rules, and also issue permits and or business licenses for drivers or companies that are operating within municipalities. Local governments have been providing the service for taxi cabs because we feel that we are best suited for the regulation of businesses that operate within our communities. New technologies and new business models that serve the needs of people and provide employment are good. We're not opposed to any of these models or ideas. We are just proponents of fair practices, safe traveling, and local control. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'll turn it back over to
Very good.
Just to further elaborate on some of the tax issues, I think it's been said here many times today that one thing government needs to strive to do is provide a level playing field for private sector to compete with each other, and not to favor one particular business model over another business model. And to do that, we want to ensure that both local and state taxes are being properly collected. The sales tax and the business occupation tax, I think, are the two primary taxes that would be charged in this situation. To our knowledge, and again, we are not able to get as much detailed information out of the Department of Revenue as we would like, but to our knowledge, we don't know that any sales tax is being collected on this particular business model. One thing that we can do is when they sign up for business occupation taxes is we can legally require them to submit us a sales tax registration number. Doesn't mean that they're actually remitting sales tax, but it does show us that they have signed up with the Department of Revenue. Another thing that probably needs to be looked at is what they call situs of the sale. In other words, where do you determine the transaction for the service takes place, what jurisdiction? For instance, in Atlanta here, we have a municipal sales tax for water and sewer that only applies inside the city limits of Atlanta. So if somebody is being picked up in the city of Atlanta but being delivered to somewhere outside the city of Atlanta, do the taxes, that part of the local taxes, are they sitused to the city of Atlanta, or are they sitused to the destination point where they may pay at the end of their ride? So those are some things that maybe need to be looked at. It also would be an opportunity to talk to both these types of companies as well as the taxi companies as to, is there a better system that would charge a tax without basing it on sale price, and we'd be willing to look at things like that. Again, it's a lot of times, I would assume, very difficult for these drivers, much less people that are hired to drive people, to know what jurisdiction they're in. I know most people don't know what jurisdiction they're in, so for them to try to determine the sales tax that's owed based upon the jurisdiction they're in seems to probably be an unreasonable request. So those are probably some things we probably ought to look at in regards to sales tax on these types of services. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Question?
The only thing I was going to mention, it really wasn't a question, but I just wanted to share something that I received from the Department of Revenue. And that, Clint, it may be something that DOR, Mac and company have shared with ACCG and GMA. It's basically they cannot query those numbers with a lot of accuracy because it completely depends on they get thousands of these returns, and it depends on the NIAC codes that are those returns are coded to. And if it's coded to something other than taxi or other than limo, such as the broader company that person may work for or contract through, it'd be very difficult to tell what exactly is the nature of their business versus what NIAC code are they filing sales and use tax returns on, and what localities those are being paid in. So I've asked that question, and DOR will be here tomorrow, just so you know, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if they want to speak per se, but that issue has been, I'm sure it's been asked numerous times. They mentioned that you had asked them last year. It was basically the same answer, a lack of accuracy in the data coming in to the DOR.
I totally agree with the statements you've made. One of the things that we've done in the 911 world is we require the companies to register. So at least we have a list of, by county, where they are doing business. And along with that registration process could be the submittal of their sales tax identification number that they have registered with DOR, because we do have quite a number of counties across the state, and I assume cities too, that do not levy the business occupation tax, which some people call the business license. Therefore, there wouldn't be that record to fall back on. So if maybe there was some sort of a registration that where, if companies that are going to provide these services in Georgia can say, here are the counties that we have potential customers in, and at least maybe DOR could use that to look into their system again to make sure that taxes are being appropriately paid to the right jurisdictions.
Or paid at all.
Right, paid at all.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to say one more thing, and I just wanted to, and I'm sure I speak for Clinton ACCG, we would like to continue to be a part of this conversation as the legislation actually comes forward. And it's an exciting technology. I know a lot of us use it, but we want to be a part of the conversation as we move into the actual drafting of legislation.
Good. I appreciate that, Justin.
Thank you, Chairman.
Do we have anyone else who wants to make a comment this afternoon? Tomorrow we have, now that we don't have public safety, we'll actually move out of here pretty quick tomorrow. Tomorrow morning we have the limos and the taxis and the Sheriff's Association on board, and we'll probably be doing some discussion with the full committee. Last chance, if anyone has anything they want to add to this today. If not, we'll see any of y'all in the morning at 10 o'clock. Thank you so much.
How's this process going to work, Chairman? We'll meet tomorrow. We'll